The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Notice: persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot in it will be shot. By order of the author, per G.G., Chief of Ordnance. Explanatory. In this book a number of dialects are used, to wit, the Missouri Negro dialect, the extremist form of the backwoods southwestern dialect, the ordinary Pike County dialect, and 4 modified varieties of this last. The shadings have not been done in a haphazard fashion or by guesswork, but painstakingly and with a trustworthy guidance in support of personal familiarity with these several forms of speech. I make this explanation for the reason that without it, many readers would suppose that all these characters were trying to talk alike and not succeeding. The author. Chapter 1. Discover Moses and the Bulrushers. You don't know about me without you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. But that ain't no matter. That book was by Mr. Mark Twain, and he told the truth, mainly. There was things which he stretched, but mainly he told the truth. That's nothing. I never seen anybody but lied one time or another without it was Aunt Polly or the widow, or maybe Mary. Aunt Polly, Tom's Aunt Polly she is, and Mary, and the widow Douglas is all told about in that book, which is mostly a true book, with some stretchers, as I said before. Now the way that the book winds up is this. Tom and me found the money that the robbers hid in the cave, and it made us rich. We got $6,000 apiece, all gold. It was an awful sight of money when it was all piled up. Well, Judge Thatcher, he took it and put it out at interest, and it fetched us $1 a day apiece all the year round, more than a body could tell what to do with. The widow Douglas, she took me for her son and allowed she would civilize me. But it was rough living in the house all the time, considering how dismal, regular, and decent the widow was in all her ways. And so when I couldn't stand it no longer, I lit out. I got into my old rags and my sugar hogshead again, and was free and satisfied. But Tom Sawyer, he hunted me up and said he was going to start a band of robbers, and I might join if I would go back to the widow and be respectable. So I went back. The widow, she cried over me and called me a poor lost lamb, and she called me a lot of other names too, but she never meant no harm by it. She put me in them new clothes again, and I couldn't do nothing but sweat and feel all cramped up. Well, then the old thing commenced again. The widow run a bill for supper, and you had to come to time. When you got to the table, you couldn't go right to eating, but you had to wait for the widow to tuck her down her head and grumble a little over the victuals, though there warn't really anything the matter with them. That is, nothing, only everything was cooked by itself. In a barrel of odds and ends, it is different. Things get mixed up, and the juice kind of swaps around, and things go better. After supper, she got out her book and learned me about Moses and the bulrushers, and I was in a sweat to find out all about 'em. But by and by she let it out that Moses had been dead a considerable long time, so then I didn't care no more about him, 'cause I don't take no stock in dead people. Pretty soon I wanted to smoke, and asked the widow to let me, but she wouldn't. She said it was a mean practice and wasn't clean, and I must try not to do it any more. That is just the way with some people. They get down on a thing when they don't know nothing about it. Here she was a-bothering about Moses, which was no kin to her, and no use to anybody being gone, you see, yet finding a power of fault with me for doing a thing that had some good in it. And she took snuff, too. Of course, that was all right, because she done it to herself. Her sister, Miss Watson, a tolerable slim old maid with goggles on, had just come to live with her, and took a set at me now with a spelling book. She worked me middling hard for about an hour, and then the widow made her ease up. I couldn't stood it much longer. Then for an hour it was deadly dull, and I was fidgety. Miss Watson would say, "Don't put your feet up there, Huckleberry," and "Don't scrunch up like that, Huckleberry, sit up straight." And pretty soon she would say, "Don't gap and stretch like that, Huckleberry, why don't you try to behave?" Then she told me all about the bad place, and I said I wish I was there. She got mad then, but I didn't mean no harm. All I wanted was to go somewheres. All I wanted was a change. I warn't particular. She said it was wicked to say what I said. Said she wouldn't say it for the whole world. She was going to live so as to go to the good place. Well, I couldn't see no advantage in going where she was going, so I made up my mind I wouldn't try for it. But I never said so, 'cause it would only make trouble and wouldn't do no good. Now she had got a start, and she went on and told me all about the good place. She said all a body would have to do there was go around all day long with a harp and sing, forever and ever. So I didn't think much of it. but I never said so. I asked her if she reckoned Tom Sawyer would go there, and she said not by a considerable sight. I was glad about that, because I wanted him and me to be together. Miss Watson, she kept pecking at me, and it got tiresome and lonesome. By and by, they fetched the niggers in and had prayers, and then everybody was off to bed. I went up to my room with a piece of candle and put it on the table. Then I sat down in a chair by the window and tried to think of something cheerful, but it weren't no use. I felt so lonesome I most wished I was dead. The stars were shining, and the leaves rustled in the woods ever so mournful, and I heard an owl away off, hoo-hooing about somebody that was dead, and a whippoorwill and a dog crying about somebody that was gonna die, and the wind was trying to whisper something to me, and I couldn't make out what it was, and so it made the cold shivers run over me. Then away out in the woods I heard that kind of a sound that a ghost makes when it wants to tell about something that's on its mind, and can't make itself understood, and so can't rest easy in its grave, and has to go about that way every night grieving. I got so downhearted and scared I did wish I had some company. Pretty soon a spider went crawling up my shoulder, and I flipped it off, and it lit in the candle. And before I could budge, it was all shriveled up. I didn't need nobody to tell me what that was, an awful bad sign, and would fetch me some bad luck. So I was scared, and most shook the clothes off of me. I got up and turned around in my tracks 3 times, and crossed my breast every time, and then I tied up a little lock of my hair with a thread to keep witches away. But I had no confidence. You do that when you've lost a horseshoe that you found, instead of nailing it up over the door. But I haven't ever heard anybody say it was any way to keep off bad luck when you'd killed a spider. I sat down again, shaking all over, and got up my pipe for a smoke. For the house was all as still as death now, and so the widow wouldn't know. Well, after a long time, I heard the clock tick away off in the town go boom, 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 12 licks, and all still again, stiller than ever. Pretty soon I heard a twig snap down in the dark amongst the trees. Something was a-stirring. I sat still and listened. Directly I could just barely hear a meow, meow, down there. That was good. Says I, meow, meow, as soft as I could, and then I put out the light and scrambled out of the window onto the shed. Then I slipped down to the ground and crawled in among the trees, and sure enough, there was Tom Sawyer waiting for me. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. We went tiptoeing along a path amongst the trees back toward the end of the widow's garden, stooping down so as the branches wouldn't scrape our heads. When we was passing by the kitchen, I fell over a root and made a noise. We scrouched down and laid still. Miss Watson's big nigger, named Jim, was setting in the kitchen door. We could see him pretty clear, because there was a light behind him. He got up and stretched his neck out about a minute, listening. Then he says, "Who dere?" He listened some more. Then he came tiptoeing down and stood right between us. We could have touched him, nearly. Well, likely it was minutes and minutes there warn't a sound, and we all there so close together. There was a place on my ankle that got to itching, but I dasn't scratch it. And then my ear begun to itch, and next my back, right between my shoulders. Seemed like I'd die if I couldn't scratch. Well, I've noticed that thing plenty times since. If you are with the quality, or at a funeral, or trying to go to sleep when you ain't sleepy, if you are anywheres where it won't do for you to scratch, why you will itch all over and upward of 1,000 places. Pretty soon Jim says, "Say, who is you? Where is you? Dog my cats if I didn't hear something." Well, I know what I's going to do. I's going to sit down here and listen till I hears it again. So he sat down on the ground betwixt me and Tom. He leaned his back up against a tree and stretched his legs out till one of them most touched one of mine. My nose begun to itch. It itched till the tears come into my eyes, but I dasn't scratch. Then it begun to itch on the inside. Next I got to itching underneath. I didn't know how I was going to sit still. This miserableness went on as much as 6 or 7 minutes, but it seemed a sight longer than that. I was itching in 11 different places now. I reckoned I couldn't stand it more than a minute longer, but I set my teeth hard and got ready to try. Just then Jim begun to breathe heavy. Next he began to snore. Tom, he made a sign to me, kind of a little noise with his mouth, and we went off creeping away on our hands and knees. When we was 10 foot off, Tom whispered to me and wanted to tie Jim to the tree for fun. But I said no. He might wake and make a disturbance, and then they'd find out I weren't in. Then Tom said he hadn't got candles enough and he would slip in the kitchen and get some more. I didn't want him to try. I said Jim might wake up and come. But Tom wanted to risk it, so we slid in there and got 3 candles, and Tom laid 5 cents on the table for pay. Then we got out, and I was in a sweat to get away. But nothing would do Tom but he must crawl to where Jim was, on his hands and knees, and place something on him. I waited, and it seemed a good while. Everything was so still and lonesome. As soon as Tom was back, we cut along the path, around the garden fence, and by fetched up on the steep top of the hill the other side of the house. Tom said he slipped Jim's hat off of his head and hung it on a limb right over him, and Jim stirred a little, but he didn't wake. Afterward, Jim said the witches bewitched him and put him in a trance, and rode him all over the state, and then set him under the trees again and hung his hat on a limb to show who done it. And next time Jim told it, he said they rode him to New Orleans, and after that, every time he told it, he spread it more and more, till by and by he said they rode him all over the world, and tied him most to death, and his back was all over saddle boils. Jim was monstrous proud of it, and he got so he wouldn't hardly notice the other niggers. Niggers would come miles to hear Jim tell about it, and he was more looked up to than any nigger in that country. Strange niggers would stand with their mouths open and look him all over, same as if he was a wonder. Niggers is always talking about witches in the dark by the kitchen fire, but whenever one was talking and letting on to know all about such things, Jim would happen in and say, what you know about witches? And that nigger was corked up and had to take a back seat. Jim always kept that 5-center piece round his neck with a string, and said it was a charm the devil give him with his own hands, and told him he could cure anybody with it and fetch witches whenever he wanted to just by saying something to it. But he never told what it was he said to it. Niggers would come from all around there and give Jim anything they had just for the sight of that 5-center piece, but they wouldn't touch it because the devil had had his hands on it. Jim was most ruined for a servant because he got stuck up on account of having seen the devil and been rode by witches. Well, when Tom and me got to the edge of the hilltop, we looked away down into the village and could see 3 or 4 lights twinkling, where there were sick folks maybe. And the stars over us was sparkling, and down by the village was the river, a whole mile broad, and awful still and grand. We went down the hill and found Joe Harper and Ben Rogers and 2 or 3 more of the boys hid in an old tanyard. So we unhitched a skiff and pulled down the river 2.5 miles to the big scar on the hillside and went ashore. We went to a clump of bushes, and Tom made everybody swear to keep the secret and then showed them a hole in the hill right in the thickest part of the bushes. Then we lit the candles and crawled in on our hands and knees. We went about 200 yards, and then the cave opened up. Tom poked about amongst the passages, and pretty soon ducked under a wall where you wouldn't have noticed that there was a hole. We went along a narrow place and got into a kind of room, all damp and sweaty and cold, and there we stopped. Tom says, "Now, we'll start this band of robbers and call it Tom Sawyer's Gang. Everybody that wants to join has got to take an oath and write his name in blood." Everybody was willing, so Tom got out a sheet of paper that he had wrote the oath on and read it. It swore every boy to stick to the band and never tell any of the secrets. And if anybody done anything to any boy in the band, whichever boy was ordered to kill that person and his family must do it. And he mustn't eat and he mustn't sleep till he had killed them and hacked a cross in their breasts, which was the sign of the band. And nobody that didn't belong to the band could use that mark, and if he did, he must be sued, and if he done it again, he must be killed. And if anybody that belonged to the band told the secrets, he must have his throat cut, and then have his carcass burn up and the ashes scattered all around, and his name blotted off the list with blood and never mentioned again by the big gang, but have a curse put on it and be forgot forever. Everybody said it was a real beautiful oath, and asked Tom if he got it out of his own head. He said some of it, but the rest of it was out of pirate books and robber books, and every gang that was high-toned had it. Some thought it would be good to kill the families of boys that told the secrets. Tom said it was a good idea, so he took a pencil and wrote it in. Then Ben Rogers says, "Here's Huck Finn. He ain't got no family. What you gonna do about him?" "Well, ain't he got a father?" says Tom Sawyer. "Yes, he's got a father, but you can't never find him these days. He used to lay drunk with the hogs in the tanyard, but he ain't been seen in these parts for a year or more." They talked it over, and they was gonna rule me out, because they said every boy must have a family or somebody to kill, or else it wouldn't be fair and square for the others. Well, nobody could think of anything to do. Everybody was stumped and set still. I was most ready to cry, but all at once I thought of a way, and so I offered them Miss Watson. They could kill her. Everybody said, "Oh, she'll do. That's all right. Huck can come in." Then they all stuck a pin in their fingers to get blood to sign with, and I made my mark on the paper. "Now," says Ben Rogers, "what's the line of business of this gang?" "Nothing, only robbery and murder," Tom said. "But who are we going to rob? Houses or cattle or—" "Stuff. Stealing cattle and such things ain't robbery. It's burglary," says Tom Sawyer. "We ain't burglars. That ain't no sort of style. We are highwaymen. We stop stages and carriages on the road with masks on and kill the people and take their watches and money." "Must we always kill the people?" "Oh, certainly. It's best. Some authorities think different, but mostly it's considered best to kill them, except some that you bring to the cave here and keep them till they're ransomed." "Ransomed? What's that?" "I don't know, but that's what they do. I've seen it in books, and so, of course, that's what we've got to do." "But how can we do it if we don't know what it is?" "Why, blame it all, we've got to do it. Don't I tell you it's in the books? Do you want to go doing different from what's in the books and get things all muddled up?" "Oh, that's all very fine to say, Tom Sawyer, but how in the nation are these fellows going to be ransomed if we don't know how to do it to them? That's the thing I want to get at. Now, what do you reckon it is?" "Well, I don't know, but perhaps if we keep 'em till they're ransomed, it means that we keep 'em till they're dead." "Now, that's something like. That'll answer. Why couldn't you say that before? We'll keep 'em there till they're ransomed to death, and a bothersome lot they'll be, too, eating up everything and always trying to get loose." "How you talk, Ben Rogers. How can they get loose when there's a guard over them ready to shoot them down if they move a peg?" "Well, guard? Well, that is good. So somebody's got to sit up all night and never get any sleep just so as to watch 'em. I think that's foolishness. Why can't a body take a club and ransom them as soon as they get here?" "Because it ain't in the books, that's why. Now, Ben Rogers, do you want to do things regular or don't you? That's the idea. Don't you reckon that the people that made the books knows what's the correct thing to do? Do you reckon you can learn 'em anything? Not by a good deal. No, sir. We'll just go on and ransom them in the regular way." "All right, I don't mind, but I say it's a fool's way anyhow. Say, do we kill the women too?" "Well, Ben Rogers, if I was as ignorant as you, I wouldn't let on. Kill the women? No. Nobody ever saw anything in the books like that. You fetch 'em to the cave, and you're always polite as pie to 'em, and by and by they fall in love with you and never want to go home any more." "Well, if that's the way, I'm agreed, but I don't take no stock in it. Mighty soon we'll have the cave so cluttered up with women and fellows waiting to be ransomed that there won't be no place for the robbers. But go ahead, I ain't got nothing to say." Little Tommy Barnes was asleep now, and when they waked him up he was scared and cried, and said he wanted to go home to his ma, and didn't want to be a robber any more. So they all made fun of him and called him Crybaby, and that made him mad, and he said he would go straight and tell all the secrets. But Tom give him 5 cents to keep quiet, and said we would all go home and meet next week, and rob somebody, and kill some people. Ben Rogers said he couldn't get out much, only Sundays, and so he wanted to begin next Sunday. But all the boys said it would be wicked to do it on Sunday, and that settled the thing. They agreed to get together and fix a day as soon as they could, and then we elected Tom Sawyer first captain and Joe Harper second captain of the gang, and so started home. I clumb up the shed and crept into my window just before day was breaking. My new clothes was all greased up and clayey, and I was dog tired. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. We ambuscade the Arabs. Well, I got a good going over in the morning from old Miss Watson on account of my clothes. But the widow, she didn't scold, but only cleaned off the grease and clay, and looked so sorry that I thought I would behave a while if I could. Then Miss Watson, she took me in the closet and prayed, but nothing come of it. She told me to pray every day, and whatever I asked for, I would get it. But it weren't so. I tried it. Once I got a fish line, but no hooks. It weren't any good to me without hooks. I tried for the hooks 3 or 4 times, but somehow I couldn't make it work. By and by, one day, I asked Miss Watson to try for me, but she said I was a fool. She never told me why, and I couldn't make it out no way. I sat down one time back in the woods and had a long think about it. I says to myself, if a body can get anything they pray for, why don't Deacon Wynn get the money he lost on pork? Why can't the widow get back her silver snuff box that was stole? Why can't Miss Watson fat up? No, says I to myself, there ain't nothing in it. I went and told the widow about it, and she said the thing a body could get by praying for it was spiritual gifts. This was too many for me, but she told me what she meant. I must help other people, and do everything I could for other people, and look out for them all the time, and never think about myself. This was including Miss Watson, as I took it. I went out in the woods and turned it over in my mind a long time, but I couldn't see no advantage about it, except for the other people. So at last I reckoned I wouldn't worry about it any more, but just let it go. Sometimes the widow would take me one side and talk about Providence in a way to make a body's mouth water. But maybe next day Miss Watson would take hold and knock it all down again. I judged I could see that there were two providences, and a poor chap could stand considerable show with the widow's providence. But if Miss Watson's got 'em, there warn't no help for 'em any more. I thought it all out, and reckoned I would belong to the widow's if he wanted me, though I couldn't make out how he was going to be any better off than when he was before, seeing I was so ignorant, and so kind of low down and ornery. Pap, he hadn't been seen for more than a year, and that was comfortable for me. I didn't want to see him no more. He used to always wail on me when he was sober and could get his hands on me, though I used to take to the woods most of the time when he was round. Well, about this time, he was found in the river drownded, about 12 mile above town, so people said. They judged it was him anyway. Said this drownded man was just his size, and was ragged, and had uncommon long hair, which was all like Pap. But they couldn't take nothing out of the face, because it had been in the water so long it weren't much like a face at all. They said he was floating on his back in the water. They took him and buried him on the bank. But I wasn't comfortable long, because I happened to think of something. I knowed mighty well that a drowned man don't float on his back, but on his face. So I knowed then that this weren't Pap, but a woman dressed up in an old man's clothes. So I was uncomfortable again. I judged the old man would turn up again by and by, though I wished he wouldn't. We played robber now and then about a month, and then I resigned. All the boys did. We hadn't robbed nobody, hadn't killed any people, but only just pretended. We used to hop out of the woods and go charging down on hog drivers and women in carts taking garden stuff to market, but we never hived any of 'em. Tom Sawyer called the hogs ingots, and he called the turnips and stuff jewelry, and we would go to the cave and powwow over what we had done, and how many people we had killed and marked. But I couldn't see no profit in it. One time Tom sent a boy to run about town with a blazing stick, which he called a slogan, which was the sign for the gang to get together. And then he said he had got secret news by his spies that next day a whole parcel of Spanish merchants and rich Arabs was going to camp in Cave Hollow with 200 elephants and 600 camels and over 1,000 sumpter mules all loaded down with diamonds. And they didn't have only a guard of 400 soldiers, and so we could lay an ambuscade, as he called it, and kill a lot and scoop the things. He said we must slick up our swords and guns and get ready. He never could go after even a turnip cart, but he must have the swords and guns all scoured up for it, though they was only lathe and broomsticks, and you might scour at them till you rotted, and then they weren't worth a mouthful of ashes more than what they was before. I didn't believe we could lick such a crowd of Spaniards and Arabs, but I wanted to see the camels and elephants, so I was on hand next day, Saturday, in the ambuscade. And when we got the word, we rushed out of the woods and down the hill. But there weren't no Spaniards and Arabs, and there weren't no camels nor no elephants. It weren't anything but a Sunday school picnic, and only a primer class at that. We busted it up and chased the children up the hollow, but we never got anything but some doughnuts and jam, though Ben Rogers got a rag doll, and Joe Harper got a hymn book and a tract, and then the teacher charged in and made us drop everything and cut. I didn't see no diamonds, and I told Tom Sawyer so. He said there were loads of 'em there, anyway, and he said there was Arabs too, and elephants and things. I said, why couldn't we see 'em then? He said if I weren't so ignorant, but had read a book called Don Quixote, I would know without asking. He said it was all done by enchantment. He said there was hundreds of soldiers there, and elephants and treasure, and so on. But we had enemies which he called magicians, and they had turned the whole thing into an infant Sunday school, just out of spite. I said, all right, then the thing for us to do was to go for the magicians. Tom Sawyer said I was a numbskull. Why, said he, a magician could call up a lot of genies, and they would hash you up like nothing before you could say Jack Robinson. They are as tall as a tree, and as big around as a church. Well, I says, suppose we got some genies to help us. Can't we lick the other crowd then? How you gonna get 'em? I don't know. How do they get 'em? Why, they rub an old tin lamp or an iron ring, and then the genies come tearing in with the thunder and lightning a-ripping around, and the smoke a-rolling, and everything they're told to do, they up and do it. They don't think nothing of pulling a shot tower up by the roots and belting a Sunday school superintendent over the head with it, or any other man. What makes 'em tear around so? Why, whoever rubs the lamp or the ring. They belong to whoever rubs the lamp or the ring, and they've got to do whatever he says. If he tells them to build a palace 40 miles long out of diamonds, and fill it full of chewing gum, or whatever you want, and fetch an emperor's daughter from China for you to marry, they've got to do it. And they've got to do it before sunup next morning, too. And more, they've got to waltz that palace around over the country wherever you want it, you understand? Well, says I think they're a pack of fetheads for not keeping the palace themselves instead of fooling around like that. And what's more, if I was one of them, I would see a man in Jericho before I would drop my business and come to him for the rubbing of an old tin lamp. How you talk, Huck Finn. Why, you'd have to come when he rubbed it, whether you wanted to or not. What, and I as high as a tree, and as big as a church? All right, then, I would come, but I lay I'd make that lamb climb the highest tree there was in the country. Shucks. It ain't no use to talk to you, Huck Finn. You don't seem to know anything somehow. Perfect saphead. I thought all this over for 2 or 3 days, and then I reckoned I would see if there was anything in it. I got an old tin lamp and an iron ring, and went out in the woods and rubbed till I sweat like an Injun, calculating to build a palace and sell it. But it weren't no use. None of the genies come. So then I judged that all that stuff was just one of Tom Sawyer's lies. I reckoned he believed in the Arabs and the elephants, but as for me, I think different. It had all the marks of a Sunday school. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Hairball Oracle. Well, 3 or 4 months run along, and it was well in the winter now. I had been to school most all the time, and could spell, and read, and write just a little, and could say the multiplication table up to 6 times 7 is 35, and I don't reckon I could ever get any further than that if I was to live forever. I don't take no stock in mathematics, anyway. At first I hated the school, but by and by I got so I could stand it. Whenever I got uncommon tired, I played hooky, and the hiding I got next day done me good and cheered me up. So the longer I went to school, the easier it got to be. I was getting sort of used to the widow's ways, too, and they weren't so raspy on me. Living in a house and sleeping in a bed pulled on me pretty tight mostly, but before the cold weather I used to slide out and sleep in the woods sometimes, and so that was a rest to me. I liked the old ways best, but I was getting used, so I liked the new ones, too, a little bit. The widow said I was coming along slow but sure, and doing very satisfactory. She said she weren't ashamed of me. One morning I happened to turn over the salt cellar at breakfast. I reached for some of it as quick as I could to throw over my left shoulder and keep off the bad luck, but Miss Watson was in ahead of me and crossed me off. She says, "Take your hands away, Huckleberry. What a mess you are always making." The widow put in a good word for me, but that weren't going to keep off the bad luck. I know that well enough. I started out after breakfast, feeling worried and shaky, and wondering where it was going to fall on me and what it was going to be. There's ways to keep off some kinds of bad luck, but this wasn't one of them kind, so I never tried to do anything, but just poked along low-spirited and on the watch-out. I went down to the front garden and clumb over the stile where you go through the high-board fence. There was an inch of new snow on the ground, and I seen somebody's tracks. They had come up from the quarry and stood around the stile a while, and then went on around the garden fence. It was funny they hadn't come in, after standing around so. I couldn't make it out. It was very curious somehow. I was going to follow around, but I stooped down to look at the tracks first. I didn't notice anything at first, but next I did. There was a cross in the left boot heel made with big nails to keep off the devil. I was up in a second and shinning down the hill. I looked over my shoulder every now and then, but I didn't see nobody. I was at Judge Thatcher's as quick as I could get there. He said, "Why, my boy, you're all out of breath. Did you come for your interest?" "No, sir," I says. "Is there some for me?" "Oh, yes. A half yearly is in last night. Over $150. Quite a fortune for you. You had better let me invest it along with your $6,000, because if you take it, you'll spend it." "No, sir," I says. "I don't want to spend it. I don't want it at all, nor the $6,000 neither. I want you to take it. I want to give it to you, the $6,000 and all." He looked surprised. He couldn't seem to make it out. He says, "Why, what can you mean, my boy?" I says, "Don't you ask no questions about it, please. You'll take it, won't you?" He says, "Well, I'm puzzled. Is something the matter?" "Please take it," says I, "and don't ask me nothing. Then I won't have to tell no lies." He studied a while, and then he says, "Oh, I think I see. You want to sell all your property to me, not give it. That's the correct idea." Then he wrote something on a paper and read it over and says, "There, you see it says, 'for a consideration.' That means I have bought it of you and paid you for it. Here's $1 for you. Now you sign it." So I signed it and left. Miss Watson's nigger, Jim, had a hairball as big as your fist, which had been took out of the fourth stomach of an ox, and he used to do magic with it. He said there was a spirit inside of it, and it knowed everything. So I went to him that night and told him Pap was here again, for I found his tracks in the snow. What I wanted to know was, what was he going to do, and was he going to stay? Jim got out his hairball and said something over it, and then he held it up and dropped it on the floor. It fell pretty solid, and only rolled about an inch. Jim tried it again, and then another time, and it acted just the same. Jim got down on his knees and put his ear against it and listened. But it weren't no use. He said it wouldn't talk. He said sometimes it wouldn't talk without money. I told him I had an old slick counterfeit quarter that weren't no good because the brass showed through the silver a little, and it wouldn't pass nohow even if the brass didn't show, because it was so slick it felt greasy, and so that would tell on it every time. I reckoned I wouldn't say nothing about the $1 I got from the judge. I said it was pretty bad money, but maybe the hairball would take it, because maybe it wouldn't know the difference. Jim smelt it, and bit it, and rubbed it, and said he would manage so the hairball would think it was good. He said he would slip open a raw Irish potato and stick the quarter in between and keep it there all night, and next morning you couldn't see no brass, and it wouldn't feel greasy no more, and so anybody in town would take it in a minute, let alone a hairball. Well, I knowed a potato would do that before, but I had forgot it. Jim put the quarter under the hairball and got down and listened again. This time he said the hairball was all right. He said it would tell my whole future if I wanted it to. I says, "Go on." So the hairball talked to Jim, and Jim told it to me. He says, "Your father don't know yet what he's going to do. Sometimes he spects he'll go away, and then again he spec he'll stay. The best way is to rest easy and let the old man take his own way. They's two angels hovering round about him. One of 'em is white and shiny, and the other one is black. The white one gets him to go right a little while. Then the black one sail in and bust it all up. A body can't tell yet which one going to fetch him at the last. But you is all right. You going to have considerable trouble in your life, and considerable joy. Sometimes you going to get hurt, and sometimes you going to get sick. But every time you's going to get well again. They's two gals flying about you in your life. One of 'em's light, and the other one is dark. One of 'em's rich, and the other one is poor. You's going to marry the poor one first, and then the rich one by and by. You wants to keep away from the water as much as you can, and don't run no risk, case it's down in the bills, that you's going to get hung." When I lit my candle and went up to my room that night, there sat Pap, his own self. End of Chapter 4.
Chapter 6. Well, pretty soon the old man was up and around again, and he went for Judge Thatcher in the courts to make him give up that money. And he went for me, too, for not stopping school. He catched me a couple of times and thrashed me. But I went to school just the same, and dodged him or outrun him most of the time. I didn't want to go to school much before, but I reckoned I'd go now to spite Pap. That law trial was a slow business. Appeared like they weren't ever going to get started on it. So every now and then I'd borrow $2 or $3 off the judge for him, to keep from getting a cowhide. Every time he got money, he got drunk. And every time he got drunk, he raised Cain around town. And every time he raised Cain, he got jailed. He was just suited. This kind of thing was right in his line. He got to hanging around the widows too much, and so she told him at last that if he didn't quit using around there, she would make trouble for him. Well, wasn't he mad? He said he would show who was Huck Finn's boss. So he watched out for me one day in the spring and catched me, and took me up the river about 3 miles in a skiff, and crossed over to the Illinois shore, where it was wooded and there weren't no houses but an old log hut, in a place where the timber was so thick you couldn't find it if you didn't know where it was. He kept me with him all the time, and I never got a chance to run off. We lived in that old cabin, and he always locked the door and put the key under his head nights. He had a gun which he had stole, I reckon, and we fished and hunted, and that was what we lived on. Every little while he locked me in and went down to the store 3 miles to the ferry, and traded fishing game for whiskey, and fetched it home and got drunk and had a good time, and licked me. The widow, she found out where I was by and by, and she sent a man over to try and get a hold of me. But Pap drove him off with a gun, and it weren't long after that till I was used to being where I was and liked it, all but the cowhide part. It was kind of lazy and jolly, laying off comfortable all day, smoking and fishing, and no books nor study. 2 months or more run along, and my clothes got to be all rags and dirt, and I didn't see how I'd ever get to like it so well at the widow's, where you had to wash, and eat on a plate, and comb up, and go to bed and get up regular, and be forever bothering over a book, and have old Miss Wasson pecking at you all the time. I didn't want to go back no more. I'd stopped cussing because the widow didn't like it, but now I took to it again because Pap had no objections. It was pretty good at times up there in the woods, take it all around. But by and by, Pap got too handy with his hickory, and I couldn't stand it. I was all over welts. He got to going away so much, too, and locking me in. Once he locked me in and was gone 3 days. It was dreadful lonesome. I judged he had got drowned, and I wasn't ever going to get out any more. I was scared. I made up my mind I would fix up some way to leave there. I tried to get out of that cabin many a time, but I couldn't find no way. There warn't a window to it big enough for a dog to get through. I couldn't get up the chimney. It was too narrow. The door was thick, solid oak slabs. Pap was pretty careful not to leave a knife or anything in the cabin when he was away. I reckon I had hunted the place over as much as 100 times. Well, I was most all the time at it, 'cause it was the only way to put in the time. But this time I found something at last. I found an old rusty wood saw without any handle. It was laid in between a rafter and the clapboards of the roof. I greased it up and went to work. There was an old horse blanket nailed against the logs at the far end of the cabin behind the table, to keep the wind from blowing through the chinks and putting the candle out. I got under the table and raised the blanket, and went to work to saw a section of the big bottom log out, big enough to let me through. Well, it was a good long job, but I was getting towards the end of it when I heard Pap's gun in the woods. I got rid of the signs of my work and dropped the blanket and hid my saw, and pretty soon Pap come in. Pap warn't in a good humor, so he was his natural self. He said he was downtown and everything was going wrong. His lawyer said he reckoned he would win his lawsuit and get the money if they ever got started on the trial. But then there was ways to put it off a long time, and Judge Thatcher knowed how to do it. And he said people allowed there'd be another trial to get me away from him and give me to the widow for my guardian, and they guessed it would win this time. This shook me up considerable, 'cause I didn't want to go back to the widow's anymore and be so cramped up and civilized, as they called it. Then the old man got to cussing and cussing everything and everybody he could think of, and then cussed them all over again to make sure he hadn't skipped any. And after that he polished off with a kind of general cuss all around, including a considerable parcel of people which he didn't know the names of. He so called them what's-his-name when he got to them, and went right along with his cussing. He said he'd like to see the widow get me. He said he would watch out, and if they tried to come any such game on him, he knowed a place 6 or 7 miles off to stow me in, where they might hunt till they dropped and they couldn't find me. That made me pretty uneasy again, but only for a minute. I reckon I wouldn't stay on hand till he got that chance. The old man made me go to the skiff and fetch the things he'd got. There was a 50-pound sack of cornmeal and a side of bacon, ammunition, and a 4-gallon jug of whiskey, and an old book and 2 newspapers for wadding, besides some tow. I toted up a load and went back and sat down on the bow of the skiff to rest. I thought it all over, and I reckoned I would walk off with a gun and some lines and take to the woods when I run away. I guessed I wouldn't stay in one place, but just tramp right across the country, mostly night times, and hunt and fish to keep alive, and get so far away that the old man nor the widow couldn't ever find me any more. I judged I would saw out and leave that night if Pap got drunk enough, and I reckoned he would. I got so full of it I didn't notice how long I was staying till the old man hollered and asked me whether I was asleep or drownded. I got the things all up to the cabin, and then it was about dark. While I was up cooking supper, the old man took a swig or two and got sort of warmed up, and went to ripping again. He'd been drunk over in town and laid in the gutter all night, and he was a sight to look at. A buddy would think he was Adam, he was just all mud. Whenever his liquor begun to work, he almost always went for the government. This time he says, "Call this a government? Why, just look at it and see what it's like. Here's the law standing ready to take a man's son away from him, a man's own son, in which he's had all the trouble and all the anxiety and all the expense of raising. Yes, just as that man has got that son raised at last and ready to go to work and begin to do something for him and give him a rest, the law up and goes for him, and they call that government. That ain't all nother. The law backs that old Thatcher up there and helps him to keep me out of my property. Here's what the law does. The law takes a man's worth $6,000 and upwards, and jams him into an old trap of a cabin like this, and lets him go around in clothes that ain't fitting for a hog. They call that government. A man can't get his rights in a government like this. Sometime I've a mighty notion to just leave the country for good and all. Yes, and I told them so. I told Judge Thatcher to his face. Lots of 'em heard me and can tell what I said. Says I, for 2 cents I'd leave the blamed country and never come a near it again. Them's the very words. I says, look at my hat, if you call it a hat, but the lid raises up and the rest of it goes down till it's below my chin, and then it ain't rightly a hat at all, but more like my head was shoved up through a gin old stovepipe. Look at it, says I, such a hat for me to wear, one of the wealthiest men in this town if I could get my rights. Oh yes, this is a wonderful government, wonderful. Why, looky here. There was a free nigger there from Ohio, and they're lighter, most as white as a white man. He had the whitest shirt on you ever see, too, and the shiniest hat. There ain't a man in that town that's got as fine clothes as what he had. And he had a gold watch and a chain and a silver-headed cane, the awfulest old gray-headed nabob in the state. And what do you think? They said he was a professor in college, and could talk all kinds of languages, and knowed everything. And that ain't the worst. They said he could vote when he was at home. Well, that let me out, thinks I. Where is this country a-comin' to? It was 'lection day, and I was just about to go and vote myself if I weren't too drunk to get there. But when they told me there was a state in this country where they let that nigger vote, I drawed out. I says I'll never vote again. Them's the very words I said, and they all heard me. And the country may rot for all me. I'll never vote again as long as I live. And to see that cool way of that nigger, why, he wouldn't give me the road if I hadn't shoved him out of the way. I says to the people, why ain't this nigger put up at auction and sold? That's what I want to know. And what do you reckon they said? Why, they said he couldn't be sold till he'd been in the state 6 months, and he hadn't been here that long yet. There now, that's a specimen. They call that a government, and can't sell a free nigger till he's been in the state 6 months. Here's a government that calls itself a government, and lets on to be a government, and thinks it is a government, and yet it's got to set stock still for 6 whole months before it can take hold of a prowling, thieving, infernal, white-shirted free nigger, and Pap was a-going on so he never noticed where his old limber legs was taking him to. So he went head over heels over the tub of salt pork and barked both shins. The rest of his speech was all the hottest kind of language, mostly hove at the nigger and the government, though he give the tub some too all along here and there. He hopped around the cabin considerable, first on one leg and then on the other, holding first one shin and then the other one, and at last he let out with his left foot all of a sudden and fetched the tub a rattling kick. But it weren't good judgment, because that was the boot that had a couple of his toes leaking out of the front end of it. So now he raised a howl that fairly made a body's hair rise, and down he went in the dirt and rolled there and held his toes, and the cussin' he had done then laid over everything he had ever done previous. He said so his own self afterwards. He had heard old Solberry Hagan in his best days, and he said it laid over him too, but I reckon that was sort of piling it on, maybe. After supper Pap took the jug, and he said he had enough whiskey there for 2 drunks and 1 delirium trance. That was always his word. I judged he would be blind drunk in about an hour, and then I would steal the key or saw myself out, one or the other. He drank and tumbled down on his blankets by and by, but luck didn't run my way. He didn't go sound asleep, but was uneasy. He groaned and moaned and thrashed around his way in that for a long time. At last I got so sleepy I couldn't keep my eyes open, all I could do. And so before I knowed what I was about, I was sound asleep, and the candle burning. I don't know how long I was asleep, but all of a sudden there was an awful scream, and I was up. There was Pap looking wild, and skipping around every which way and yelling about snakes. He said they was crawling up his legs, and then he would give a jump and a scream and say one had bit him on the cheek, but I couldn't see no snakes. He started run around all round the cabin, hollering, take him off, he's biting me on the neck. I never see a man look so wild in the eyes. Pretty soon he was all fagged out and fell down panting. Then he rolled over and over wonderful fast, kicking things every which way and striking and grabbing at air with his hands and screaming and saying there was devils a hold of him. He wore out by and by and laid still a while, moaning. Then he laid stiller and didn't make a sound. I could hear the owls and the wolves away off in the woods, and it seemed terrible still. He was laying over on the corner. By and by he raised up part way and listened, and with his head to one side he says very low, tramp, 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 that's the dead tramp, tramp, tramp. They're coming after me, but I won't go. Oh, they're here. Don't touch me, don't. Hands off, they're cold, let go. Oh, let a poor devil alone. Then he went down on all fours and crawled off, begging him to let him alone. And he rolled himself up in his blanket and wallowed in under the old pine table, still a-begging. And then he went to crying. I could hear him through the blanket. By and by he rolled out and jumped up on his feet, looking wild, and he see me and went for me. He chased me round and round the place with a clasp knife, calling me the angel of death, and saying he would kill me. And then I couldn't come for him no more. I begged and told him I was only Huck, but he laughed such a screechy laugh and roared and cussed and kept on chasing me up. Once when I turned short and dodged under his arm, he made a grab and got me by the jacket between my shoulders, and I thought I was gone, but I split out of the jacket quick as lightning and saved myself. Pretty soon he was all tired out and dropped down with his back against the door and said he would rest a minute and then kill me. He put his knife under him and said he would sleep and get strong and then he would see who was who. So he dozed off pretty soon. By and by I got the old split-bottom chair and clumb up as easy as I could, not to make any noise, and got down the gun. I slipped the ramrod down to make sure it was loaded, and then I laid it across the turnip barrel, pointing towards Pap, and sat down behind it to wait for him to stir. And how slow and still the time did drag along. End of chapter 6.
Chapter 7. Get up! What you 'bout? I opened my eyes and looked around trying to make out where I was. It was after sunup, and I had been sound asleep. Pap was standing over me looking sour and sick, too. He says, "What you doin' with this gun?" I judged he didn't know nothing about what he had been doing. So I says, "Somebody tried to get in, so I was laying for 'em." "Why didn't you roust me out?" "Well, I tried to, but I couldn't budge you." "Well, all right. Don't stand there palavering all day, but be out with you, and see if there's a fish on the lines for breakfast. I'll be along in a minute." He unlocked the door, and I cleared out up the river bank. I noticed some pieces of limbs and such things floating down, and a sprinkling of bark, so I'd knowed the river had begun to rise. I reckoned I would have great times now if I was over at the town. The June rise used to be always luck for me, because as soon as that rise begins, here comes cordwood floating down, and pieces of log grafts, sometimes a dozen logs together. So all you have to do is catch them and sell them to the wood yards and the sawmill. I went along up the bank with one eye out for pap and t'other one out for what the rise might fetch along. Well, all at once here comes a canoe. Just a beauty, too. About 13 or 14 foot long, riding high like a duck. I shot head first off of the bank like a frog, clothes and all on, and struck out for the canoe. I just expected there'd be somebody laying down in it, because people often done that to fool folks, and when a chap had pulled a skiff out most to it, they'd raise up and laugh at him. But it warn't so this time. It was a drift canoe sure enough, and I clumb in and paddled her to shore. Thinks I, the old man will be glad when he sees this. She's worth $10. But when I got to shore, Pap wasn't in sight yet, and as I was running her into a little creek like a gully, all hung over with vines and willows, I struck another idea. I judged I'd hide her good, and then, 'stead of taking to the woods when I run off, I'd go down to the river about 50 mile and camp in one place for good, and not have such a rough time tramping on foot. It was pretty close to the shanty, and I thought I heard the old man coming all the time. But I got her hid, then I out and looked around a bunch of willows, and there was the old man down the path a piece, just drawing a bead on a bird with his gun, so he hadn't seen anything. When he got along, I was hard at it taking up a trot line. He abused me a little for being so slow, but I told him I fell in the river, and that's what made me so long. I knowed he would see I was wet, and then he would be asking questions. He got 5 catfish off the lines and went home. While we laid off after breakfast to sleep up, both of us being about wore out, I got to thinking that if I could fix up some way to keep Pat and the widow from trying to follow me, it would be a certainer thing than trusting to luck to get far enough off before they missed me. You see, all kind of things might happen. But I didn't see no way for a while, but by and by Pap raised up a minute to drink another barrel of water, and he says, "Another time a man comes prowling around here, you roust me out, you hear? That man weren't here for no good. I'd a shot him. Next time you roust me out, you hear?" Then he dropped down and went to sleep again. But what he had been saying give me the very idea I wanted. I says to myself, I can fix it now so nobody won't think of following me. About 12 o'clock, we turned out and went along up the bank. The river was coming up pretty fast, and lots of driftwood going by on the rise. By and by along comes part of a log raft, 9 logs fast together. We went out with a skiff and towed it ashore. Then we had dinner. Anybody but Pap would have waited and seen the day through so as to catch more stuff. But that weren't Pap's style. 9 logs was enough for one time. He must shove right over to town and sell. Soon he locked me in and took the skiff, and started off towing the raft about 3:30. I judged he wouldn't come back that night. I waited till I reckoned he had got a good start. Then I out with my saw and went to work on that log again. Before he was to other side of the river, I was out of that hole. Him and his raft was just a speck on the water way off yonder. I took the sack of cornmeal and took it to where the canoe was hid, and shoved the vines and branches apart and put it in. And then I done the same thing with the side of bacon and the whiskey jug. I took out all the coffee and sugar there was, and all the ammunition. I took the wadding, I took the bucket and the gourd. I took a dipper and a tin cup, and my old saw and 2 blankets and the skillet and the coffee pot. I took fish lines and matches and other things, everything that was worth a cent. I cleaned out the place. I wanted an axe, but there warn't any, only one out at the woodpile, and I knowed why I was going to leave that. I fetched out the gun, and now I was done. I had wore the ground a good deal crawling out of the hole and dragging out so many things, so I fixed that as good as I could from the outside by scattering dust on the place, which covered up the smoothness in the sawdust. Then I fixed the piece of log back into its place and put 2 rocks under it and one against it to hold it there, for it was bent up at that place and didn't quite touch the ground. If you stood 4 or 5 feet away and didn't know it was sawed, you wouldn't never notice it. And besides, this was the back of the cabin, and it warn't likely anybody'd go fooling around there. It was all grass clear to the canoe, so I hadn't left a track. I followed around to see. I stood on the bank, looked out over the river, all safe. So I took the gun and went up a piece into the woods and was hunting around for some birds when I see a wild pig. Hogs soon went wild in them bottoms after they had got away from the prairie farms. I shot this fellow and took him into camp. I took the axe and smashed in the door. I beat it and hacked it considerable a-doing it, fetched the pig in and took him back nearly to the table and hacked into his throat with the axe, and laid him down on the ground to bleed. I say ground, 'cause it was ground, hard packed and no boards. Well, next I took an old sack and put a lot of big rocks in it, all I could drag, and I started it from the pig and dragged it to the door and through the woods down to the river and dumped it in. And down it sunk out of sight. You could easily see that something had been dragged over the ground. I did wish Tom Sawyer was there. I knowed he would take an interest in this kind of business and throw in the fancy touches. Nobody could spread himself like Tom Sawyer in such a thing like that. Well, last I pulled out some of my hair and bloodied the axe good and stuck it at the backside and slung the axe in the corner. Then I took up the pig and held him to my breast with my jacket so he couldn't drip, till I got a good piece below the house and dumped him into the river. Now I thought of something else, so I went and got the bag of meal and my old saw out of the canoe and fetched them up to the house. I took the bag where it used to stand and ripped a hole in the bottom of it with the saw, for there weren't no knives or forks on the place. Pap done everything with his clasp knife about the cooking. Then I carried the sack about 100 yards across the grass and through the willows east of the house, to a shallow lake that was 5 miles wide and full of rushes, and ducks too, you might say, in season. There was a slough or a creek leading out of it on the other side that went miles away. I don't know where, but it didn't go to the river. I dropped Pap's whetstone there too, so as to look like it had been done by accident. Then I tied up the rip in the meal sack with a string, so it wouldn't leak no more, and took it and my saw to the canoe again. It was about dark now, so I dropped the canoe down the river under some willows that hung over the bank, and waited for the moon to rise. I made fast to a willow, then I took a bite to eat, and by laid down in the canoe to smoke a pipe and lay out a plan. I says to myself, they'll follow the track of that sack full of rocks to the shore, then drag the river for me. Then they'll follow that meal track to the lake, and go browsing down the creek that leads out of it to find the robbers that killed me and took the things. They won't ever hunt the river for anything but my dead carcass. They'll soon get tired of that, and won't bother no more about me. All right, I can stop anywhere I want to. Jackson's Island is good enough for me. I know that island pretty well, and nobody ever comes there. And then I can paddle over to town nights and slink around and pick up things I want. Jackson Island's the place. I was pretty tired, and the first thing I knowed I was asleep. When I woke up, I didn't know where I was for a minute. I sat up and looked around a little scared. Then I remembered. The river looked miles and miles across. The moon was so bright I could have counted the drift logs that went a-slippin' along black and still, hundreds of yards out from shore. Everything was dead quiet, and it looked late, and smelt late. You know what I mean. I don't know the words to put it in. I took a good gap and stretch, and was just going to unhitch and start when I heard a sound away over the water. I listened. Pretty soon I made it out. It was that dull kind of regular sound that comes from oars working in rowlocks when it's a still night. I peeped out through the willow branches, and there it was, a skiff, away across the water. I couldn't tell how many was in it. It kept a-comin', and when it was abreast of me, I see there warn't but one man in it. Thinks I, maybe it's Pat, though I warn't expectin' him. He dropped below me with the current, and by he came a-swinging up shore in the easy water. He went by so close I could have reached out the gun and touched him. Well, it was Pap, sure enough, and sober too, by the way he laid his oars. I didn't lose no time. The next minute I was a-spinning downstream, soft but quick, in the shade of the bank. I made 2 miles and a half, and then struck out 1/4 of a mile or more toward the middle of the river, because pretty soon I would be passing the ferry landing, and people might see me and hail me. I got out amongst the driftwood, then laid down in the bottom of the canoe and let her float. I laid there and had a good rest and a smoke out of my pipe, looking away into the sky, not a cloud in it. The sky looks ever so deep when you lay down on your back in the moonshine. I never knowed it before. And how far a body can hear on the water such nights. I heard people talking at the ferry landing. I heard what they said, too, every word of it. One man said it was getting towards the long days and the short nights now. The other one said this warn't one of the short ones, he reckoned. And then they laughed, and he said it over again, and they laughed again. Then they waked up another fella and told him and laughed. But he didn't laugh. He ripped out something brisk and said let him alone. First feller said he'd 'lowed to tell it to his old woman. She would think it was pretty good, but he said that weren't nothin' to some things he had said in his time. I heard one man say it was nearly 3 o'clock, and he hoped daylight wouldn't wait more'n about a week longer. After that the talk got further and further away. I couldn't make out the words any more, but I could hear the mumble, and now and then a laugh too, but it seemed a long ways off. I was away below the ferry now. I rose up, and there was Jackson's Island about 2 miles and a half downstream, heavy timbered and standing up out of the middle of the river, big and dark and solid, like a steamboat without any lights. There weren't any signs of the bar at the head. It was all under water now. It didn't take me long to get there. I shot past the head at a ripping rate, the current was so swift, and then I got into the dead water and landed on the side toward the Illinois shore. I run the canoe into a deep dent in the bank that I knowed about. I had to part the willow branches to get in, and when I made fast, nobody could 'a' seen the canoe from outside. I went up and set down on a log at the head of the island and looked out on the big river and the black driftwood and away over to the town, 3 mile away, where there was 3 or 4 lights twinklin'. A monstrous big lumber raft was about a mile upstream comin' along down, with a lantern in the middle of it. I watched it come creepin' down, and when it was most abreast of where I stood, I heard a man say, "Stern oars there, heave her head to starboard." I heard that just as plain as if the man was by my side. There was a little gray in the sky now, so I stepped in the woods and laid down for a nap before breakfast. This is the end of Chapter 7.
Chapter 8. The sun was up so high when I walked that I judged it was after 8 o'clock. I laid there in the grass and the cool shade, thinking about things and feeling rested and rather comfortable and satisfied. I could see the sun out at one or two holes, but mostly it was big trees all about, and gloomy in there amongst them. There was freckled places on the ground where the light sifted down through the leaves, and the freckled places swapped about a little, showing there was a little breeze up there. A couple of squirrels sat on a limb and jabbered at me very friendly. I was powerful lazy and comfortable, didn't want to get up and cook breakfast. Well, I was dozing off again when I thinks I hears a deep sound of boom away up the river. I rouses up and rests on my elbow and listens. Pretty soon I hears it again. I hopped up and went and looked out at a hole in the leaves, and I see a bunch of smoke layin' on the water a long ways up, about abreast the ferry. And there was the ferry boat full of people floating along down. I knowed what was the matter now. Boom! I see the white smoke squirt out of the ferry boat's side. You see, they was firing cannon over the water, trying to make my carcass come to the top. I was pretty hungry, but I won't going to do for me to start a fire, because they might see the smoke. So I sat there and watched the cannon smoke and listened to the boom. The river was a mile wide there, and it always looked pretty on a summer morning, so I was having a good enough time seeing them hunt for my remainders, if I only had a bite to eat. Well, then I happened to think how they always put quicksilver in loaves of bread and float them off, because they always go right to the drownded carcass and stop there. So, says I, I'll keep a lookout, and if any of them's floating around after me, I'll give them a show. I changed to the Illinois edge of the island to see what luck I could have, and I warn't disappointed. A big double loaf come along, and I most got it with a long stick, but my foot slipped and she floated out further. Of course I was where the current set in the closest to the shore. I knowed enough for that. But by and by along comes another one, and this time I won. I took out the plug and shook out the little dab of quicksilver, and set my teeth in. It was baker's bread, what the quality eat, none of your low-down corn-pone. I got a good place amongst the leaves, and set there on a log, munching the bread and watching the ferry boat, and very well satisfied. And then something struck me. I says, now I reckon the widow or the parson or somebody prayed that this bread would find me, and here it has gone and done it. So there ain't no doubt but there is something in that thing. That is, there's something in it when a body like the widow or the parson prays, but it don't work for me, and I reckon it don't work for only just the right kind. I lit a pipe and had a good long smoke, and went on watching. The ferry boat was floating with the current, and I allowed I'd have a chance to see who was aboard when she come along, because she would come in close, where the bread did. When she'd got pretty well along down towards me, I put out my pipe and went to where I fished out the bread, and lay down behind a log on the bank in a little open place. Where the log forked I could peep through. By and by she come along, and she drifted in so close that they could have run out a plank and walked ashore. Most everybody was on that boat. Pop and Judge Thatcher and Bessie Thatcher and Joe Harper and Tom Sawyer and his old Aunt Polly and Sid and Mary and plenty more. Everybody was talking about the murder. But the captain broke in and says, "Look sharp now, the current sets in the closest here, and maybe he's washed ashore and got tangled amongst the brush at the water's edge. I hope so, anyway." Why, I didn't hope so. They all crowded up and leaned over the rails nearly in my face and kept still, watching with all their might. I could see them first rate, but they couldn't see me. Then the captain sung out, "Stand away!" and the cannon let off such a blast right before me that it made me deaf with the noise and pretty near blind with the smoke, and I judged I was gone. If they'd had some bullets in, I reckon they'd 'a' got the corpse they was after. Well, I see I warn't hurt, thanks to goodness. The boat floated on and went out of sight around the shoulder of the island. I could hear the booming now and then, further and further off, and by, after an hour, I didn't hear it no more. The island was 3 mile long. I judged they had got to the foot, and was giving it up. But they didn't yet a while. They turned around the foot of the island and started up the channel on the Missouri side, under steam and booming once in a while as they went. I crossed over to that side and watched them. When they got abreast the head of the island, they quit shooting and dropped over to the Missouri shore and went home to the town. I knowed I was all right now. Nobody else would come a-hunting after me. I got my traps out of the canoe and made me a nice camp in the thick woods. I made a kind of a tent out of my blankets to put my things under so the rain couldn't get at them. I catched a catfish and haggled him open with my saw, and toward sundown I started my campfire and had supper. Then I set out a line to catch some fish for breakfast. When it was dark, I sat by my campfire smoking and feeling pretty well satisfied. But by and by it got sort of lonesome, and so I went and sat on the bank and listened to the currents washing along, and counted the stars and drift logs and rafts that come down, and then went to bed. There ain't no better way to put in time when you are lonesome. You can't say so. You soon get over it. And so for 3 days and nights, no difference, just the same thing. But the next day I went exploring around down through the island. I was boss of it. It all belonged to me, so to say, and I wanted to know all about it. But mainly I wanted to put in the time. I found plenty strawberries, ripe and prime, and green summer grapes, and green raspberries, and the green blackberries was just beginning to show. They would all come handy by and by, I judged. Well, I went fooling along in the deep woods till I judged I warn't far from the foot of the island. I had my gun along, but I hadn't shot nothing. It was for protection. Thought I would kill some game nigh home. About this time I mighty near stepped on a good-sized snake, and it went sliding off through the grass and flowers, and I after it, trying to get a shot at it. I clipped along, and all of a sudden I bounded right onto the ashes of a campfire that was still smoking. My heart jumped up amongst my lungs. I never waited for to look further, but uncocked my gun and went sneaking back on my tiptoes as fast as I ever could. Every now and then I stopped a second amongst the thick leaves and listened, but my breath come so hard I couldn't hear nothing else. I slung along another piece further, then listened again, and so on, and so on. If I see a stump, I took it for a man. If I trod on a stick and broke it, it made me feel like a person had cut one of my breaths in two, and I only got half, and the short half too. When I got to the camp, I warn't feeling very brash. There warn't much sand in my craw, but I says, this ain't no time to be fooling around, so I got all my traps into my canoe again so as to have them out of sight, and I put out the fire and scattered the ashes around to look like an old last year's camp, and then clumb a tree. I reckon I was up in the tree 2 hours, but I didn't see nothing. I didn't hear nothing. I only thought I heard and seen as much as 1,000 things. Well, I couldn't stay up there forever, so at last I got down, but I kept in the thick woods and on the lookout all the time. All I could get to eat was berries and what was left over from breakfast. By the time it was night I was pretty hungry, so when it was good and dark I slid out from shore before moonrise and paddled over to the Illinois bank, about 1/4 of a mile. I went out in the woods and cooked a supper, and I had about made up my mind I would stay there all night when I hear a plunkety-plunk, plunkety-plunk, and says to myself, horses coming, and next I hear people's voices. I got everything into the canoe as quick as I could and went creeping through the woods to see what I could find out. I hadn't got far when I hear a man say, "We better camp here if we can find a good place. The horses is about beat out. Let's look around." I didn't wait, but shoved out and paddled away easy. I tied up in the old place and reckoned I would sleep in the canoe. I didn't sleep much. I couldn't somehow, for thinking, and every time I waked up I thought somebody had me by the neck. So the sleep didn't do me no good. By and by I says to myself, I can't live this way. I'm a-going to find out who it is that's here on the island with me. I'll find it out or bust. Well, I felt better right off. So I took my paddle and slid out from shore, just a step or two, and then let the canoe drop along down amongst the shadows. The moon was shining, and outside of the shadows it made it most as light as day. I poked along well on to an hour, everything still as rocks and sound asleep. Well, by this time I was most down to the foot of the island. A little ripply, cool breeze began to blow, and that was as good as saying the night was about done. I give her a turn with the paddle, and brung her nose to shore. Then I got my gun and slipped out and into the edge of the woods. I sat down there on a log, and looked out through the leaves. I see the moon go off watch, and the darkness begin to blanket the river. But in a little while I see a pale streak over the tree-tops, and knowed the day was comin'. So I took my gun and slipped off towards where I had run across that campfire, stopping every minute or two to listen. But I hadn't no luck somehow. I couldn't seem to find the place. But by and by, sure enough, I catched a glimpse of a fire away through the trees. I went for it, cautious and slow. By and by I was close enough to have a look, and there laid a man on the ground. It most give me the fantods. He had a blanket around his head, and his head was nearly in the fire. I sat there behind a clump of bushes in about 6 foot of him, and kept my eyes on him steady. It was getting gray daylight now. Pretty soon he gapped and stretched himself, and hove off the blanket, and it was Miss Watson's Jim. I bet I was glad to see him. I says, "Hello, Jim," and skipped out. He bounced up and stared at me wild. Then he drops down on his knees and puts his hand together and says, "Don't hurt me, don't. I ain't ever done no harm to a ghost. I always liked dead people and done all I could for 'em. You go and get in the river again, where you belongs, and don't do nothing to old Jim, that is always your friend." Well, I warn't long making him understand I warn't dead. I was ever so glad to see Jim. I warn't lonesome now. I told him I warn't afraid of him telling the people where I was. I talked along, but he only set there and looked at me, never said nothing. Then I says, "It's good daylight. Let's get breakfast. Make up your campfire good." "What's the use of making a campfire to cook strawberries and such tuck? But you got a gun, ain't you? Then we can get something better than strawberries." "Strawberries and such truck," I says. "Is that what you live on?" "I couldn't get nothing else," he says. "Why, how long you been on the island, Jim?" "I come here the night after you was killed." "What, all that time?" "Yes, indeedy." "And ain't you had nothing but that kind of rubbish to eat?" "No, sir, nothing else." "Well, you must be most starved, ain't you?" "I reckon I could eat a horse. I think I could. How long you been on the island?" "Since the night I got killed." "No. Why, what has you lived on? But you got a gun. Oh, yes, you got a gun. That's good. Now you kill something and I'll make up the fire." So we went out over to where the canoe was, and while he built a fire in a grassy open place amongst the trees, I fetched meal and bacon and coffee pot and frying pan, and sugar and tin cups, and the nigger was set back considerable, because he reckoned it was all done with witchcraft. I catched a good big catfish too, and Jim cleaned him with his knife, and fried him. When breakfast was ready, we lolled on the grass and eat it smoking hot. Jim laid it in with all his might, for he was most about starved. Then, when we had got pretty well stuffed, we laid off and lazied. By and by Jim says, "But looky here, Huck, who is it that was killed in that shanty, if it weren't you?" Then I told him the whole thing, and he said it was smart. He said Tom Sawyer couldn't get up no better plan than what I had. Then I says, "How do you come to be here, Jim, and how'd you get here?" He looked pretty uneasy, and didn't say nothing for a minute. Then he says, "Maybe I better not tell." "Why, Jim?" "Well, there's reasons, but you wouldn't tell on me if I was to tell you, would you, Huck?" "Blamed if I would, Jim." "Well, I believe you, Huck. I run off." "Jim!" "But mind, you said you wouldn't tell. You know, you said you wouldn't tell, Huck." "Well, I did. I said I wouldn't, and I'll stick to it. Honest Injun, I will. People would call me a low-down abolitionist and despise me for keeping mum, but that don't make no difference. I ain't going to tell, and I ain't going back there anyways. So now let's know all about it." "Well, you see, it is this way. Old Mrs., that Mrs. Watson, she pecks on me all the time and treats me pretty rough, but she always said she wouldn't sell me down to Orleans. But I noticed there was a nigger trade around the place considerable lately, and I began to get uneasy. Well, one night I creeps to the door pretty late, and the door won't quite shut, and I hear old Missus tell the widder she gonna sell me down to Orleans, but she didn't wanna, but she could get $800 for me, and it is such a big stack of money she couldn't resist. The widder she tried to get her to say she wouldn't do it, but I never waited to hear the rest. I lit out mighty quick, I tell you. I took out and shin down the hill and spec to steal a skiff long the shore, somewhere above the town, but they was people stirring yet, so I hid in the old tumble-down copper shop on the bank to wait for everybody to go away. Well, I was there all night. They was somebody round all the time. Long 'bout 6 in the morning, skiffs begin to go by, and 'bout 8 or 9, every skiff that went long was talking 'bout how your pop come over to town and say you's killed. These last skiffs was full of ladies and gentlemen a going over to see the place. Sometimes they'd pull up to the shore and take a rest before they'd started across, so they'd talk. I got to know all about the killing. I was powerful sorry you's killed, Huck, but I ain't no more now. I laid there under the shavings all day. I was hungry, but I warn't afraid, because I knowed old Missus and the widow was going to start to a camp meeting right after breakfast, and be gone all day, and they knows I goes off with the cattle 'bout daylight, so they wouldn't expect to see me round the place, and so they wouldn't miss me till after dark in the evening. The other servants wouldn't miss me, 'cause they'd shin out and take holiday soon as the old folks was out of the way. Well, when it come dark, I took out up the river road and went 'bout 2 mile or more to where they weren't no houses. I'd make up my mind 'bout what I was a-goin' to do. You see, if I kep' on trying to get away afoot, the dogs 'd track me. If I stole a skiff to cross over, they'd miss that skiff, you see, and they'd know 'bout where I'd land on the other side, and where to pick up my track. So I says a raft is what I's after. It don't make no track. I see a light comin' round the point by and by, so I wade in and shove a log ahead of me, and swum more'n halfway across the river, and got in 'mongst the driftwood, and kept my head down low, and kinder swum again the current till the raft come along. Then I swum to the stern of it and took a holt. It clouded up and it was pretty dark for a while, so I clumb up and lay down on the planks. The man is all way yonder in the middle where the lantern was. The river was rising and there was a good current, so I reckoned that by 4 in the morning I'd be 25 miles down the river, and then I'd slip in just before daylight and swim ashore and take to the woods in the Illinois side. But I didn't have no luck. When we was most down to the head of the island, a man began to come aft with the lantern. I see it warn't no use for to wait, so I slid overboard and struck out for the island. Well, I had a notion I could land most anywheres, but I couldn't. Bank too bluff. I was most to the foot of the island before I found a good place. I went into the woods and judged I wouldn't fool with rafts no more, long as they moved the lantern round so. I had my pipe and a plug of dog leg and some matches in my cap, and they weren't wet, so I was all right. And so you ain't had no meat nor bread to eat all this time? Why didn't you get mud turtles? How you going to get 'em? You can't slip up on 'em and grab 'em, and how's a body going to hit 'em with a rock? How could a body do it in the night? And I won't going to show myself on the bank in the daytime. Well, that's so. You had to keep in the woods all time, of course. Did you hear 'em shooting the cannon? Oh, yes, I knowed they was after you. I see 'em go by, watched 'em through the bushes. Some young birds come along, flying a yard or two at a time and lighting. Jim said it was a sign it was going to rain. He said it was a sign when young chickens flew that way, and so he reckoned it was the same way when young birds done it. I was going to catch some of 'em, but Jim wouldn't let me. He said it was death. He said his father laid mighty sick once, and some of them catched a bird, and his old granny said his father would die, and he did. And Jim said you mustn't count the things you're going to cook for dinner, because that would bring bad luck. The same if you shook the tablecloth after sundown. And he said if a man owned a beehive, and that man died, the bees must be told about it before sun-up next morning, or else the bees would all weaken down and quit work and die. Jim said bees wouldn't sting idiots, but I didn't believe that, because I had tried them lots of times myself, and they wouldn't sting me. I had heard about some of these things before, but not all of 'em. Jim knowed all kinds of signs. He said he knowed most everything. I said it looked to me like all the signs was about bad luck, and so I asked him if there warn't any good luck signs. He says, mighty few, and they ain't no use to a body. What you want to know when good luck's a-comin' for? Want to keep it off? And he said, if you's got hairy arms and a hairy breast, it's a sign that you's going to be rich. Well, there's some use in a sign like that, 'cause it's so far ahead. You see, maybe you's got to be poor a long time first, and so you might get discouraged and kill yourself if you didn't know by the sign that you're going to be rich by and by. Have you got hairy arms and a hairy breast, Jim? What's the use to ask that question? Don't you see I has? Well, are you rich? No, but I been rich once, and gonna be rich again. Once I'd have $14, but I took to speculating and got busted out. What did you speculate in, Jim? Well, first I tackled stock. What kind of stock? Why, livestock, cattle, you know. I put $10 in a cow, but I ain't gonna risk no more money in stock. The cow up and died on my hands. So you lost the $10? No, I didn't lose it at all. I only lost about 9 of it. I sold a hide and taller for $1.10. You had $5.10 left. Did you speculate any more? Yes, you know, that one-legged nigger that belongs to old Miss Bradish. Well, he sot up a bank, and say anybody that put in $1 would get $4 more at the end of the year. Well, all the niggers went in, but they didn't have much. I was the only one that had much. So I stuck out for more than $4, and I said if I didn't get it, I'd start a bank myself. Well, of course that nigger wanted to keep me out of the business because he says they weren't business enough for 2 banks. So he said I could put in my $5 and he'd pay me $35 at the end of the year. So I done it. Then I reckon I'd invest the $35 right off and keep things a-movin'. There was a nigger named Bob that had ketched a wood flat, and his master didn't know it, and I bought it off'n him and told him to take the $35 when the end of the year come. But somebody stole the wood flat that night, and next day the one-legged nigger say the bank's busted. So they didn't none of us get no money. What did you do with the 10 cents, Jim? Well, I was going to spend it, but I had a dream, and the dream told me to give it to a nigger named Balloom. Balloom's as they call him for short. He's one of them chuckleheads, you know. But he's lucky, they say, and I see I weren't lucky. The dream say let Balloom invest the 10 cents, and he'd make a rise for me. Well, Balloom he took the money, and when he was in church he heard a preacher say that whoever give to the poor lend to the Lord, and bound to get his money back 100 times. So Balloom he took and give the 10 cents to the poor, and laid low to see what was going to come of it. Well, what did come of it, Jim? Nothing ever come of it. I couldn't manage to collect that money no way, and Balloom he couldn't. I ain't going to lend no more money, doubt I see the security. Bound to get your money back 100 times, the preacher says. If I could get the 10 cents back, I'd call it squash, and be glad of the chance. Well, it was all right anyway, Jim, long as you're going to be rich again sometime or other. Yes, and I's rich now, come to look of it. I owns myself, and I's worth $800. I wished I'd had the money. I wouldn't want no more. End of chapter 8.
Chapter 9. The House of Death Floats By. I wanted to go and look at a place right about the middle of the island that I'd found when I was exploring. So we started and soon got to it, because the island was only 3 miles long and 1/4 of a mile wide. This place was a tolerable long, steep hill or ridge, about 40 foot high. We had a rough time getting to the top. The sides was so steep and the bushes so thick. We tramped and climbed around all over, and by found a good big cavern in the rock, most up to the top on the side towards Illinois. The cavern was as big as 2 or 3 rooms bunched together, and Jim could stand up straight in it. It was cool in there. Jim was for putting our traps in there right away, but I said we didn't want to be climbing up and down there all the time. Jim said if we had the canoe hidden a good place, and had all the traps in the cavern, we could rush there if anybody was to come to the island, and they would never find us without dogs. And besides, he said them little birds had said it was going to rain, and did I want the things to get wet? So we went back and got the canoe and paddled up abreast the cavern and lugged all the traps up there. Then we hunted up a place close by to hide the canoe in, amongst the thick willows. We took some fish off the lines and set them again, and begun to get ready for dinner. The door of the cavern was big enough to roll a hogshead in, and on one side of the door the floor stuck out a little bit and was flat, and a good place to build a fire on. So we built it there and cooked dinner. We spread the blankets inside for a carpet, and eat our dinner in there. We put all the other things handy at the back of the cavern. Pretty soon it darkened up, and begun to thunder and lightning, so the birds was right about it. Directly it began to rain, and it rained like all fury too, and I never see the wind blow so. It was one of these regular summer storms. It would get so dark that it looked all blue-black outside, and lovely, and the rain would thrash along by so thick that the trees off a little ways looked dim and spider-webby. And here would come a blast of wind that would bend the trees down and turn up the pale underside of the leaves, and then a perfect ripper of a gust would follow along and set the branches to toss in their arms as if they was just wild. And next, when it was just about the bluest and blackest, it was as bright as glory, and you'd have a little glimpse of tree-tops a-plunging about away off yonder in the storm, hundreds of yards further than you could see before. Dark as sin again in a second, and now you'd hear the thunder let go with an awful crash, and then go rumbling, grumbling, tumbling down the sky towards the underside of the world, like rolling empty barrels downstairs, where it's long stairs, and they bounce a good deal, you know. "Jim, this is nice," I says. "I wouldn't want to be nowhere else but here. Pass me along another hunk of fish and some hot cornbread." "Well, you wouldn't have been here if it hadn't been for Jim. You'd have been down there in the woods without any dinner, and getting most drownded, too. That you would, honey. Chickens knows when it's gonna rain, and so do the birds, child." The river went on raising and raising to 10 or 12 days, till at last it was over the banks. The water was 3 or 4 foot deep on the island in the low places and on the Illinois bottom. On that side it was a good many miles wide, but on the Missouri side it was just the same old distance across, half a mile, because the Missouri shore was just a wall of high bluffs. Daytimes we paddled all over the island in the canoe. It was mighty cool and shady in the deep woods, even if the sun was blazing outside. We went winding in and out amongst the trees, and sometimes the vines hung so thick we had to back away and go some other way. Well, on every old broken-down tree you could see rabbits and snakes and such things, and when the island had been overflowed a day or two, they got so tame, on account of being hungry, that you could paddle right up and put your hand on them if you wanted to. But not the snakes and turtles. They would slide off in the water. The ridge our cavern was in was full of them. We could have had pets enough if we'd wanted them. One night we catched a little section of lumber raft, nice pine planks. It was 12 foot wide and about 15 or 16 foot long, and the top stood above water 6 or 7 inches, a solid level floor. We could see saw logs go by in the daylight sometimes, but we let them go. We didn't show ourselves in daylight. Another night, when we was up at the head of the island, just before daylight, here comes a frame house down on the west side. She was a 2-story, and tilted over considerable. We paddled out and got aboard. Clumb in at an upstairs window. But it was too dark to see yet, so we made the canoe fast and set in her to wait for the daylight. The light begun to come before we got to the foot of the island. Then we looked in at the window. We could make out a bed and a table and 2 old chairs and lots of things around about on the floor, and there was clothes hanging against the wall. There was something laying on the floor in the far corner that looked like a man. So Jim says, "Hello, you!" But it didn't budge. So I hollered again, and then Jim says, "The man ain't asleep. He dead. You hold still, I'll go and see." He went and bent down and looked and says, "It's a dead man. Yes, indeedy. Naked, too. He's been shot in the back, and I reckon he's been dead 2 or 3 days. Come in, Huck, but don't look at his face. It's too ghastly." I didn't look at him at all. Jim throwed some old rags over him, but he needn't have done it. I didn't want to see him. There was heaps of greasy old cards scattered around over the floor, and old whiskey bottles, and a couple of masks made out of black cloth. And all over the walls was the ignorantest kind of words and pictures made with charcoal. There was 2 old dirty calico dresses and a sunbonnet, and some women's underclothes hanging against a wall, and some men's clothing too. We put the lot into the canoe. It might come good. There was a boy's old speckled straw hat on the floor. I took that too. And there was a bottle that had milk in it, and it had a rag stopper for a baby to suck. We would have took the bottle, but it was broke. There was a seedy old chest and an old hair trunk with the hinges broke. They stood open, but there weren't nothing left in them that was any account. The way things was scattered about, we reckoned the people left in a hurry, and weren't fixed so as to carry off most of their stuff. We got an old tin lantern and a butcher knife without any handle, and a brand new Barlow knife worth 2 bits in any store, and a lot of tallow candles, and a tin candlestick, and a gourd, and a tin cup, and a ratty old bed quilt off the bed, and a reticule with needles and pins and beeswax and buttons and thread and all such tuck in it, and a hatchet and some nails, and a fish line as thick as my little finger with some monstrous hooks on it, and a roll of buckskin, and a leather dog collar, and a horseshoe, and some vials of medicine that didn't have no label on 'em. And just as we was leaving, I found a tolerable good curry comb, and Jim, he found a ratty old fiddle bow and a wooden leg. The straps was broke off it, but, barring that, it was a good enough leg, though it was too long for me and not long enough for Jim, and we couldn't find the other one, though we hunted all around. And so, take it all around, we made a good haul. When we was ready to shove off, we was 1/4 of a mile below the island, and it was pretty broad day, so I made Jim lay down in the canoe and cover up with the quilt, because if he set up, people could tell he was a nigger a good ways off. I paddled over to the Illinois shore and drifted down most a half a mile doing it. I crept up the dead water under the bank, and hadn't no accidents, and didn't see nobody. We got home, all safe. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. What Comes of Handling Snakeskin. After breakfast, I wanted to talk about the dead man and guess out how he come to be killed, but Jim didn't want to. He said it would fetch bad luck, and besides, he said, he might come and haunt us. He said a man that weren't buried was more likely to go a-haunting around than one that was planted and comfortable. That sounded pretty reasonable, so I didn't say no more. But I couldn't keep from studying over it, and wishing I knowed who shot the man, and what they done it for. We rummaged the clothes we'd got, and found $8 in silver sewed up in the lining of an old blanket overcoat. Jim said he reckoned the people in that house stole the coat, because if they'd knowed the money was there, they wouldn't have left it. I said I reckoned they killed him too, but Jim didn't want to talk about that. I says, "Now you think it's bad luck, but what did you say when I fetched in the snakeskin and I found it on top of the ridge day before yesterday? You said was the worst bad luck in the world to touch a snakeskin with my hands. Well, here's your bad luck. We've raked in all this truck and $8 besides. I wish we could have had some bad luck like this every day, Jim." "Never you mind, honey, never you mind. Don't you get too pert. It's a-comin'. Mind, I tell you, it's a-comin'." It did come, too. It was a Tuesday that we had that talk. Well, after dinner Friday we was laying around in the grass at the upper end of the ridge, and got out of tobacco. I went to the cavern to get some, and found a rattlesnake in there. I killed him, and curled him up on the foot of Jim's blanket ever so natural, thinking there'd be some fun when Jim found him there. Well, By night I forgot all about the snake, and when Jim flung himself down on the blanket while I struck a light, the snake's mate was there and bit him. He jumped up yelling, and the first thing the light showed was the varmint curled up and ready for another attack. I laid him out in a second with a stick, and Jim grabbed Pap's whiskey jug and begun to pour it down. He was barefooted, and the snake bit him right on the heel. That all comes of my being such a fool as to not remember that whenever you leave a dead snake, its mate always comes there and curls around it. Jim told me to chop off the snake's head and throw it away, and then skin the body and roast a piece of it. I done it, and he eat it, and said it would help cure him. He made me take off the rattles, and tie them around his waist, too. He said that would help. Then I slid out quiet and throwed the snakes clear away amongst the bushes, for I wasn't going to let Jim find out it was all my fault, not if I could help it. Jim sucked and sucked at the jug, and now and then he got out of his head and pitched around and yelled, but every time he come to himself he went to sucking the jug again. His foot swelled up pretty big, and so did his leg, but by and by the drunk begun to come, and so I judged he was all right. But I'd druther been bit with a snake than Pap's whiskey. Jim was laid up for 4 days and nights. Then the swelling was all gone, and he was around again. I made up my mind I wouldn't ever take a holt of a snakeskin again with my hands, now that I see what had become of it. Jim said he reckoned I would believe him the next time, and he said that handling a snakeskin was such awful bad luck that maybe we hadn't got to the end of it yet. He said he'd druther see the new moon over his left shoulder as much as 1,000 times than take up a snake in his hand. Well, I was getting to feel that way myself. I've always reckoned that looking at the new moon over your left shoulder is one of the carelessest and foolishest things a body can do. Old Hank Bunker done it once, and bragged about it, and in less than 2 years he got drunk and fell off of the shot tower, and spread himself out so that he was just a kind of layer, as you may say, and they slid him edgewise between 2 barn doors for a coffin, and buried him so they say, but I didn't see it. Pap told me. But anyway, it all come of looking at the moon that way, like a fool. Well, the days went along, and the river went down between its banks again, and almost the first thing we done was to bait one of the big hooks with a skinned rabbit and set it and catch a catfish that was as big as a man, being 6 foot 2 inches long and weighed over 200 pounds. We couldn't handle him, of course. He would have flung us into Illinois. We just sat there and watched him rip and tear around till he drowned. We found a brass button in his stomach, and a round ball, and lots of rubbish. We split the ball open with the hatchet, and there was a spool in it. Jim said he'd had it there a long time, to coat it over so and make a ball of it. It was a big fish, as ever ketched in the Mississippi. I reckon, Jim said, he hadn't ever seen a bigger one. He would have been worth a good deal over at the village. They peddle out such fish as that by the pound in the market house there. Everybody buys some of him. His meat's as white as snow and makes a good fry. Next morning I said it was getting slow and dull, and I wanted to get a stirring up some way. I said I reckoned I would slip over the river and find out what was going on. Jim liked that notion, but he said I must go in the dark and look sharp. Then he studied it over and said, couldn't I put on some of them old things and dress up like a girl? That was a good notion, too. So we shortened up one of the calico gowns, and I turned up my trouser legs to my knees and got into it. Jim hitched it behind with hooks, and it was a fair fit. I put on the sunbonnet and tied it under my chin. And then for a body to look in and see my face was like looking down a joint of stovepipe. Jim said nobody would know me, even in the daytime. Hardly. I practiced around all day to get the hang of things, and by I could do pretty well in them. Only Jim said I didn't walk like a girl, and he said I must quit pulling up my gown to get at my breeches pocket. I took notice and done better. I started up the Illinois shore in the canoe just after dark. I started across to the town from a little below the ferry landing, and the drift of the current fetched me in at the bottom of the town. I tied up and started along the bank. There was a light burning in a little shanty that hadn't been lived in for a long time, and I wondered who had took up quarters there. I slipped up and peeped in at the window. There was a woman about 40 years old in there knitting by a candle that was on the pine table. I didn't know her face. She was a stranger, for you couldn't start a face in that town that I didn't know. Now this was lucky, because I was weakening. I was getting afraid I had come. People might know my voice and find me out. But if this woman had been in such a little town 2 days, she could tell me what I really wanted to know. So I knocked on the door and made up my mind I wouldn't forget I was a girl. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. They're After Us. "Come in," says the woman, and I did. She says, "Take a cheer." I done it. She looked me all over with her shiny eyes and says, "What might your name be?" "Sarah Williams." "Whereabouts do you live? In this neighborhood?" "No, in Hookerville, 7 miles below. I've walked all the way and I'm all tired out." "Hungry too, I reckon. I'll find you something." "No, I ain't hungry. I was so hungry I had to stop 2 miles below here at a farm. So I ain't hungry no more. It's what makes me so late. My mother's down sick and out of money and everything, and I come to tell my Uncle Abner more. He lives at the upper end of the town, she says. I hain't never been there before. Do you know him?" "No, but I don't know everybody yet. I haven't lived here quite 2 weeks. It's a considerable ways to the upper end of town. You better stay here all night. Take off your bonnet." "No," I says. "I'll rest a while, I reckon, and go on. I ain't afeard of the dark." She said she wouldn't let me go by myself, but her husband would be in by and by, maybe in an hour and a half, and she'd send him along with me. Then she got to talking about her husband, and about her relations up the river, and her relations down the river, and about how much better off they used to was, and how they didn't know but they'd made a mistake coming to our town instead of letting well alone, and so on, till I was afeard I had made a mistake coming here to find out what was going on in the town. But by and by she dropped on to Pap and the murder, and then I was pretty willing to let her clatter right along. She told about me and Tom Sawyer finding the $6,000, only she got it 10. And all about Pap, and what a hard lot he was, and what a hard lot I was, and at last she got down to where I was murdered. I says, "Who done it? We've heard considerable about these goings-on in Hookerville, but we don't know who 'twas that killed Huck Finn." "Well, I reckon there's a right smart chance of people here that'd like to know who killed him. Some think old Finn done it himself." "No, is that so?" "Most everybody thought it at first. He'll never know how nigh he come to being lynched. But before night they changed around and judged it was done by a runaway nigger named Jim." "Why, he—" I stopped. I reckon I better keep still. She run on and never noticed I had put in at all. "The nigger run off the very night Huck Finn was killed. So there's a reward out for him, $300. And there's a reward out for old Finn, too, $200. You see, he come to town the morning after the murder and told about it, and was out with 'em in the ferry boat hunt, and right away after he up and left. Before night they wanted to lynch him, but he was gone, you see. Well, next day they found out the nigger was gone. They found out he hadn't been seen since 10 o'clock the night the murder was done. So then they put it on him, you see. And while they was full of it, next day back comes old Finn and went boo-hooing to Judge Thatcher to get money to hunt for the nigger all over Illinois with. The judge gave him some, and that evening he got drunk, and was about till after midnight with a couple of mighty hard-looking strangers, and they went off with them. Well, he ain't come back since, and they ain't looking for him back till this thing blows over a little. For people thinks now that he killed his boy, and fixed things so folks would think robbers done it. And then he'd get Huck's money without having to bother a long time with the lawsuit. People do say he weren't any good to do it. Oh, he's sly, I reckon. If he don't come back for a year, he'll be all right. You can't prove anything on him, you know. Everything'll be quieted down by then, and he'll walk in Huck's money as easy as nothing. Yes, I reckon so. I don't see nothing in the way of it. Has everybody quit thinking the nigger done it? Oh, no, not everybody. A good many thinks he done it. But they'll get the nigger pretty soon now, and maybe they can scare it out of him. Why are they after him yet? Well, you're innocent, ain't you? Does $300 lay around every day for people to pick up? Some folks think the nigger ain't far from here. I'm one of them. But I ain't talked it around. A few days ago I was talking with an old couple that lives next door in the log shanty, and they happened to say hardly anybody ever goes to that island over yonder, and they call Jackson's Island. Don't anybody live there, says I. No, nobody, says they. I didn't say any more, but I done some thinking. I was pretty near certain I'd seen smoke over there, about the head of the island, a day or two before that. So I says to myself, like as not that nigger's hiding over there. Anyway, says I, it's worth the trouble to give the place a hunt. I ain't seen any smoke since, so I reckon maybe he's gone, if it was him. But husband's gonna go over and see. Him and another man. He was gone up the river, but he got back today, and I told him as soon as he got here 2 hours ago. I had got so uneasy I couldn't sit still. I had to do something with my hands, so I took up a needle off the table and went to threading it. My hands shook, and I was making a bad job of it. When the woman stopped talking, I looked up, and she was looking at me pretty curious and smiling a little. I put down the needle and thread, and led on to be interested. And I was too, and says, $300 is a power of money. I wish my mother could get it. Is your husband going over there tonight? Oh, yes, he went uptown with the man I was telling you of to get a boat and see if they could borrow another gun. They'll go over after midnight. Couldn't they see better if they was to wait till daytime? Yes, and couldn't the nigger see better too? After midnight he'll likely be asleep, and they could slip around through the woods and hunt up his campfire all the better for the dark, if he's got one. I didn't think of that. The woman kept looking at me pretty curious, and I didn't feel a bit comfortable. Pretty soon she says, "What did you say your name was, honey?" Mary Williams. Somehow, it didn't seem to me that I said it was Mary before, so I didn't look up. Seemed to me I said it was Sarah, so I felt sort of cornered, and was afeared, maybe, I was looking it too. I wish that woman would say something more. The longer she sat still, the uneasier I was. But now she says, "Honey, I thought you said it was Sarah when you first come in." "Oh, yes'm, I did. Sarah Mary Williams. Sarah's my first name. Some calls me Sarah, some calls me Mary." "Oh, that's the way of it?" "Yes'm." I was feeling better then, but I wished I was out of there anyway. I couldn't look up yet. Well, the woman fell to talking about how hard times was, and how poor they had to live, and how the rats was as free as if they owned the place, and so forth and so on. And then I got easy again. She was right about the rats. You'd see one stick his nose out of a hole in the corner every little while. She said she had to have things handy to throw at them when she was alone, or they wouldn't give her no peace. She showed me a bar of lead twisted up into a knot, and said she was a good shot with it generally, but she wrenched her arm a day or two ago, and didn't know whether she could throw true now. But she watched for a chance, and directly banged away at a rat. But she missed him wide, and said, "Ouch!" It hurt her arm so. Then she told me to try for the next one. I wanted to be getting away before the old man got back, but of course I didn't let on. I got the thing, and the first rat that showed his nose I let drive, and if he'd stayed where he was, he'd have been a tolerable sick rat. She said that was first rate, and she reckoned I would have the next one. She went and got the lump of lead and fetched it back, and brought along a hank of yarn which she wanted me to help her with. I held up my 2 hands, and she put the hank over them, and went on talking about her and her husband's matters. But she broke off to say, "Keep your eye on the rats. You better have the lead in your lap handy." So she dropped the lump into my lap just at that moment, and I clasped my legs together on it, and she went on talking, but only about a minute. Then she took off the hank and looked me straight in the face, and very pleasant, and says, "Come now, what's your real name?" What, Mum? What's your real name? Is it Bill, or Tom, or Bob, or what is it? I reckon I shook like a leaf, and I didn't know hardly what to do, but I says, "Please don't poke fun at a girl like me, Mum. If I'm in the way here, I'll—" "No, you won't. Set down and stay where you are. I ain't going to hurt you, and I ain't going to tell on you nuther. You just tell me your secret and trust me. I'll keep it. And what's more, I'll help you. So'll my old man if you want him to. You see, you're a runaway prentice, that's all. It ain't anything. There ain't no harm in it. You've been treated bad, and you made up your mind to cut. Bless you, child, I wouldn't tell on you. Tell me all about it now. That's a good boy." So I said it wouldn't be no use to try to play it out any longer, and I would just make a clean breast and tell her everything, but she mustn't go back on her promise. Then I told her my father and mother was dead, and the law had bound me out to a mean old farmer in the country 30 mile back from the river, and he treated me so bad I couldn't stand it no longer. He went away to be gone a couple days, and so I took my chance and stole some of his daughter's old clothes and cleared out. And I had been 3 nights coming the 30 miles. I travelled nights and hid daytimes and slept, and the bag of bread and meat I carried from home lasted me all the way, and I had a plenty. I said I believed my Uncle Abner Moore would take care of me, and so that was why I'd struck out for this town of Goshen. "Goshen, child? This ain't Goshen. This is St. Petersburg. Goshen's 10 mile further up the river. Who told you this was Goshen?" "Why, a man I met at daybreak this morning, just as I was going to turn into the woods from my regular sleep. He told me when the roads forked I must take the right hand, and 5 mile would fetch me to Goshen." "He was drunk, I reckon. He told you just exactly wrong." "Well, he did act like he was drunk, but it ain't no matter now. I got to be moving along. I'll fetch Goshen 'fore daylight." "Hold on a minute. I'll put you up a snack to eat. You might want it." So she put me up a snack and says, "Say, when a cow's laying down, which end of her gets up first? Answer up prompt now. Don't stop to study over it. Which end gets up first?" "The hind end, Mum." "Well, then, a horse?" "The forward end, Mum." "Which side of a tree does the moss grow on?" "North side." "If 15 cows is browsing on the hillside, how many of them eats with their heads pointed in the same direction?" "The whole 15, Mum." "Well, I reckon you have lived in the country. I thought maybe you was trying to hoax me again. What's your real name, now?" "George Peters, Mum." "Well, try to remember it, George. Don't forget, and tell me it's Alexander 'fore you go, and then get out by saying it's George Alexander when I catch you. And don't go about women in that old calico. You do it a girl tolerable poor. But you might fool men, maybe. Bless you, child. When you set out to thread a needle, don't hold the thread still and fetch the needle up to it. Hold the needle still and poke the thread at it. That's the way a woman most always does, but a man always does t'other way. And when you throw at a rat or anything, hitch yourself up a tiptoe and fetch your hand up over your head as awkward as you can, and miss your rat about 6 or 7 foot. Throw stiff-armed from the shoulder, like there was a pivot there for it to turn on, like a girl. Not from the wrist and elbow with your arm to one side, like a boy. And mind you, when a girl tries to catch anything in her lap, she throws her knees apart. She don't clamp them together, the way you did when you catch the lump of lead. Why, I spotted you for a boy when you was threading the needle, and I contrived the other things just to make certain. Now trot along to your uncle, Sarah Mary Williams, George Alexander Peters, And if you get into trouble, you send word to Mrs. Judith Loftus, which is me, and I'll do what I can to get you out of it. Keep the river road all the way, and next time you tramp, take shoes and socks with you. The river road's a rocky one, and your feet'll be in condition when you get to Goshen, I reckon." I went up the bank about 50 yards, and then I doubled on my tracks and slipped back to where my canoe was, a good piece below the house. I jumped in, and was off in a hurry. I went upstream far enough to make the head of the island, and then started across. I took off the sunbonnet, for I didn't want no blinders on then. When I was about the middle, I heard the clock begin to strike, so I stops and listens. The sound come faint over the water, but clear. 11. When I struck the head of the island, I never waited to blow, though I was most winded, and I shoved right into the timber where my old camp used to be, and started a good fire there on a high and dry spot. Then I jumped in the canoe and dug out for our place, 1.5 miles below, as hard as I could go. I landed and slopped through the timber and up the ridge and into the cavern. There Jim laid, sound asleep on the ground. I roused him out and says, "Get up and hump yourself, Jim. There ain't a minute to lose. They're after us." Jim never asked no questions. He never said a word. But the way he worked for the next half an hour showed about how he was scared. By that time, everything we had in the world was on our raft, and she was ready to be shoved out from the Willow Cove where she was hid. We put out the campfire at the cavern the first thing. I didn't show a candle outside after that. I took the canoe out from the shore a little piece and took a look, but if there was a boat around I couldn't see it, for stars and shadows ain't good to see by. Then we got out of the raft and slipped along in the shade, past the foot of the island, dead still, never saying a word. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12. Better let blame well alone. It must have been close on to 1 o'clock when we got below the island at last, and the raft did seem to go mighty slow. If a boat was to come along, we was going to take to the canoe and break for the Illinois shore, and it was well a boat didn't come, for we hadn't ever thought to put the gun in the canoe, or a fishing line, or anything to eat. We was in rather too much of a sweat to think of so many things. It warn't good judgment to put everything on the raft. If the men went to the island, I just expect they found the campfire I built, and watched it all night for Jim to come. Anyways, they stayed away from us, and if my building and the fire never fooled them, it warn't no fault of mine. I played it as low down on them as I could. When the first streak of day began to show, we tied up to a towhead in a big bend on the Illinois side, and hacked off cottonwood branches with the hatchet, and covered up the raft with them, so that she looked like there had been a cave-in the bank there. A towhead is a sandbar that has cottonwoods on it as thick as harrow teeth. We had mountains on the Missouri shore and heavy timber on the Illinois side, and the channel was down in the Missouri shore at that place. So we weren't afraid of anybody running across us. We laid there all day and watched the rafts and steamboats spin down the Missouri shore, and upbound steamboats fight the big river in the middle. I told Jim all about the time I had jabbering with that woman, and Jim said she was a smart one, and if she was to start after us herself, she wouldn't sit down and watch a campfire. No, sir, she'd fetch a dog. Well, then, I said, why couldn't she tell her husband to fetch a dog? Jim said he bet she did think of it by the time the men was ready to start, and he believed they must have gone uptown to get a dog, and so they lost all that time, or else we wouldn't be here on a towhead 16 or 17 miles below the village. No, indeedy, we would be in that same old town again. So I said I didn't care what was the reason they didn't get us, as long as they didn't. When it was beginning to come on dark, we poked our heads out of the cottonwood thicket and looked up and down and across. Nothing in sight, so Jim took up some of the top planks of the raft and built a snug wigwam to get under in blazing weather and rainy, and to keep the things dry. Jim made a floor for the wigwam and raised it a foot or more above the level of the raft, so now the blankets and all the traps was out of reach of steamboat waves. Right in the middle of the wigwam we made a layer of dirt about 5 or 6 inches deep, with a frame around it for to hold it to its place. This was to build a fire on in sloppy weather or chilly. The wigwam could keep it from being seen. We made an extra steering oar, too, because one of the others might get broke on a snag or something. We fixed up a short forked stick to hang the old lantern on, because we must always light the lantern whenever we see a steamboat coming downstream, to keep from getting run over. But we wouldn't have to light it for upstream boats, unless we was in what they call a crossing. For the river was pretty high yet, very low banks being still a little under water, so upbound boats didn't always run the channel, but hunted easy water. The second night we run between 7 and 8 hours, with a current that was making over 4 miles an hour. We catched fish and talked, and we took a swim now and then to keep off sleepiness. It was kind of solemn drifting down the big still river, laying on our backs looking up at the stars, and we didn't ever feel like talking loud, and it wasn't often that we laughed, only a little kind of low chuckle. We had mighty good weather as a general thing, and nothing ever happened to us at all, that night, nor the next, nor the next. Every night we passed towns, some of them away up on hillsides, nothing but just a shiny bed of lights, not a house could you see. The 5th night we passed St. Louis, and it was like the whole world lit up. In St. Petersburg they used to say there was 20 or 30,000 people in St. Louis, but I never believed it till I see that wonderful spread of lights at 2 o'clock that still night. There weren't a sound there. Everybody was asleep. Every night now I used to slip ashore towards 10 o'clock at some little village and buy 10 or 15 cents worth of meal or bacon or other stuff to eat. And sometimes I lifted a chicken that weren't roosting comfortable and took 'em along. Pap always said take a chicken when you get a chance, because if you don't want him yourself, you can easy find somebody that does, and a good deed ain't ever forgot. I never see Pap when he didn't want the chicken himself, but that is what he used to say anyway. Mornings before daylight I slipped into cornfields and borrowed a watermelon, or a mushmelon, or a pumpkin, or some new corn, or things of that kind. Pap always said it weren't no harm to borrow things if you was meaning to pay them back sometime. But the widow said it weren't anything but a soft name for stealing, and no decent body would do it. Jim said he reckoned the widow was partly right, and Pap was partly right, so the best way would be for us to pick out 2 or 3 things from the list and say we wouldn't borrow them any more. Then he reckoned it wouldn't be no harm to borrow the others. So we talked it over all one night, drifting along down the river, trying to make up our minds whether to drop the watermelon, or the cantaloupes, or the mushmelons, or what. But towards daylight we got it all settled satisfactory, and concluded to drop crabapples and persimmons. We weren't feeling just right before that, but it was all comfortable now. I was glad the way it come out, too, because crabapples ain't ever good, and the persimmons wouldn't be ripe for 2 or 3 months yet. We shot the waterfowl now and then, that got up too early in the morning, or didn't go to bed early enough in the evening. Take it all round, we lived pretty high. The 5th night below St. Louis we had a big storm after midnight, with a power of thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down in a solid sheet. We stayed in the wigwam and let the raft take care of itself. When the lightning glared out, we could see a big straight river ahead, and high rocky bluffs on both sides. By and by says I, "Hello, Jim, looky yonder." It was a steamboat that had killed herself on a rock. She was drifting straight down for her. The lightning showed her very distinct. She was leaning over, with part of her upper deck above water, and you could see every little chimbly guy clean and clear, and a chair by the old big bell, with an old slouch hat hanging on the back of it, when the flashes come. Well, it being away in the night and stormy, and also mysterious-like, I felt just the way any other boy would have felt when I seen that wreck layin' there so mournful and lonesome in the middle of the river. I wanted to get aboard of her and slink around a little, and see what there was there. So I says, "Let's land on her, Jim." but Jim was dead against it at first. He says, "I don't wanter go foolin' longer no whack. We doin' blame well, and we better let blame well alone, as de good book says. Like as not, dey's a watchman on dat wrack." "Watchman your grandmother," I says. "There ain't nothing to watch but the Texas and the pilot house. Do you reckon anybody's going to risk his life for a Texas and a pilot house such a night as this, when it's likely to break up and wash down the river any minute?" Jim couldn't say nothing to that, so he didn't try. "And besides," I says, "we might borrow something worth having out of the captain's stateroom. Cigars, I bet you, and cost 5 cents apiece, solid cash. Steamboat captains is always rich and get $60 a month, and they don't care a cent what a thing costs. You know, as long as they want it. Stick a candle in your pocket. I can't resist, Jim, till we get her a-rummagin'. Do you reckon Tom Sawyer would ever go buy this thing? Not for pie he wouldn't. He'd call it an adventure. That's what he'd call it. And he'd land on that wreck if it was his last act. And wouldn't he throw style into it? Wouldn't he spread himself, nor nothing? Why, you'd think it was Christopher Columbus discovering Kingdom Come. I wish Tom Sawyer was here." Jim, he grumbled a little, but he give in. He said we mustn't talk any more than we could help, and then talk mighty low. The lightning showed us the wreck again just in time, and we fetched the starboard derrick and made fast there. The deck was high out here. We went sneaking down the slope of it to larboard in the dark, toward the Texas, feeling our way slow with our feet, and spreading our hands out to fend off the guys, for it was so dark we couldn't see no sign of them. Pretty soon we struck the forward end of the skylight and clumb onto it, and the next step fetched us in front of the captain's door, which was open, and by Jiminy, away down through the Texas hall we see light, and all in the same second we seemed to hear low voices in yonder. Jim whispered and said he was feeling powerful sick, and told me to come along. I says all right, and was going to start for the raft, but just then I heard a voice wail out and say, "Oh, please don't, boys, I swear I won't ever tell." Another voice said pretty loud, "It's a lie, Jim Turner. You've acted this way before. You always want more'n your share of the truck, and you've always got it, too, because you've swore it. If you didn't get it, you'd tell. But this time you've said it just one time too many. You're the meanest, treacherousest hound in this country." By the time Jim was gone for the raft, I was just a-billin' with curiosity, and I says to myself, Tom Sawyer wouldn't back out now, and so I won't either. I'm going to see what's going on here. So I dropped on my hands and knees in the little passage, and crept aft in the dark, till there weren't but one stateroom betwixt me and the cross-hall of the Texas. Then and there I see a man stretched on the floor and tied hand and foot, and 2 men standing over him, and one of them had a dim lantern in his hand, and the other one had a pistol. The one kept pointing his pistol at the man's head on the floor and saying, "I'd like to, and I order to, mean skunk." The man on the floor would shrivel up and say, "Oh, please don't, Bill, I ain't never going to tell." And every time he said that, the man with the lantern would laugh and say, "Did you ain't? You ever said no truer thing than that, you bet you." And once he said, "Hear him beg, and yet if we hadn't gotten the best of him and tied him, he'd a kill us both. And what for? Just for nothing, just because we stood on our rights, that's what for. But I lay you ain't a-going to threaten nobody no more, Jim Turner. Put up that pistol, Bill." Bill says, "I don't want to, Jake Packard. I'm for killing him. And didn't he kill old Hatfield just the same way? And don't he deserve it?" "But I don't want him killed, and I've got my reasons for it." "Bless your heart for them words, Jake Packard. I never forget you long's I live," says the man on the floor, sort of blubbering. Packard didn't take no notice of that, but hung up his lantern on a nail, and started toward where I was there in the dark, and motioned Bill to come. I crawfished as fast as I could about 2 yards, but the boat slanted so that I couldn't make very good time so as to keep from getting run over and catched. I crawled into a stateroom on the upper side. The men came a-pawing along in the dark, and when Packard got to my stateroom, he says, "Here, come in here." And in he come, and Bill after him. But before they got in, I was up in the upper berth, cornered, and sorry I come. Then they stood there with their hands on the ledge of the berth and talked. I couldn't see them, but I could tell where they was by the whiskey they'd been having. I was glad I didn't drink whiskey, but it wouldn't made much difference anyway, because most of the time they couldn't have treed me because I didn't breathe. I was too scared, and besides, a body couldn't breathe and hear such talk. They talked low and earnest. Bill wanted to kill Turner. He said he'll tell, and he will. If he was to give both our shares to him now, it wouldn't make no difference after the row and the way we've served him. Sure's you're born, he'll turn state's evidence. Now you hear me. I'm for putting him out of his troubles." "So am I," says Packard, very quiet. "Blame it, I'd sorter begun to think you wasn't. Well then, that's all right. Let's go and do it." "Hold on a minute. I hain't had my said yet. You listen to me. Shooting's good, but there's quieter ways of the things got to be done. But what I say is this. It ain't good sense to go courting around after a halter if you can get at what you're up to in some way that's just as good, and at the same time don't bring you into no risks. Ain't that so?" "You bet it is. But how you going to manage it this time?" "Well, my idea is this. We'll rustle around and gather up whatever pickings we've overlooked in the staterooms, and shove for shore and hide the truck. Then we'll wait. Now I say, it ain't a-going to be more'n 2 hours before this wreck breaks up and washes off down the river. See? He'll be drownded, and won't have nobody to blame for it but his own self. I reckon that's a considerable sight better'n killing of him. I'm unfavourable to killing a man as long as you can get around it. It ain't good sense. It ain't good morals. Ain't I right?" "Yes, I reckon you are. But s'pose she don't break up and wash off?" "Well, we can wait the 2 hours anyway and see, can't we?" "All right, then, come along." So they started, and I lit out, all in a cold sweat, and scrambled forward. It was dark as pitch there, but I said in a kind of coarse whisper, "Jim!" And he answers up, right at my elbow, with a sort of moan, and so I says, "Quick, Jim! It ain't no time for fooling around and moaning. There's a gang of murderers in yonder, and if we don't hunt up their boat instead of drifting down the river so's these fellows can't get away from the wreck, there's one of 'em going to be in a bad fix. But if we find their boat, we can put all of 'em in a bad fix, for the sheriff will get 'em. Quick! Hurry! I'll hunt the larboard side. You hunt the starboard. You start the raft and—" "Oh, my lordy, raft! That ain't no raft no mo'. She done broke loose and gone. And here we is." End of chapter 12.
Chapter 13. Well, I ketched my breath and almost fainted. Shut up on a wreck with such a gang as that? But it weren't no time to be sentimentering. We'd got to find that boat now. Had to have it for ourselves. So we went a-quaking and a-shaking down the starboard side, and slow work it was, too. Seemed a week before we got to the stern. No sign of a boat. Jim said he didn't believe he could go any further. So scared he hadn't hardly had any strength left, he said. But I said, "Come on. If we get left on this wreck, we are in a fix, sure." So on we prowled again. We struck for the stern of the Texas and found it, and then scrabbled along forwards on the skylight, hanging on from shutter to shutter, for the edge of the skylight was in the water. When we got pretty close to the cross-hall door, there was the skiff, sure enough. I could just barely see her. I felt ever so thankful. In another second I'd have been aboard of her, but just then the door opened. One of the men stuck his head out, only about a couple of foot from me, and I thought I was gone. But he jerked it in again and says, "Heave that blame lantern out of sight, Bill." He flung a bag of something into the boat, and then got in himself and set down. It was Packard. Then Bill, he come out and got it. Packard says in a low voice, "All ready, shove off." I couldn't hardly hang on to the shutters, I was so weak. But Bill says, "Hold on. Do you go through 'em?" "No. Didn't you?" "No. So he's got his share of the cash yet." "Well, then, come along. No use to take truck and leave money." Say, won't he suspicion what we're up to? Maybe he won't, but we got to have it anyway. Come along. So they got out and went in. The door slammed to because it was on the careen side, and in a half second I was in the boat, and Jim come tumbling after me. I out with my knife and cut the rope, and away we went. We didn't touch an oar, and we didn't speak, nor whisper, nor hardly even breathe. We went gliding swift along, dead silent, past the tip of the paddle box, and past the stern. Then, in a second or two more, we was 100 yards below the wreck, and the darkness soaked her up, every last sign of her, and we was safe, and knowed it. When we was 300 or 400 yards downstream, we see the lantern show like a little spark at the Texas door for a second, and we knowed by that the rascal had missed their boat, and was beginning to understand that they was in just as much trouble now as Jim Turner was. Then Jim manned the oars, and we took out after our raft. Now was the first time that I begun to worry about the men. I reckon I hadn't had time to before. I began to think how dreadful it was, even for murderers, to be in such a fix. I says to myself, "I ain't no telling but I might come to be a murderer myself yet, and then how'd I like it?" So I says to Jim, "The first light we see we'll land 100 yards below it, or above it, in a place where it's a good hiding place for you and the skiff. And then I'll go up and fix some kind of yarn, and get somebody to go for that gang and get 'em out of their scrape, so they can be hung when their time comes." But that idea was a failure, for pretty soon it begun to storm again, and this time worse than ever. The rain poured down, and never a light showed. Everybody in bed, I reckon. We boomed along down the river, watching for lights and watching for our raft. After a long time the rain let up, but the clouds stayed, and the lightning kept whimpering, and by a flash showed us a black thing ahead, floating, and we made for it. It was the raft, and mighty glad was we to get aboard of it again. We seen a light now, way down to the right, on shore, so I said I would go for it. The skiff was half full of plunder which that gang had stowed there on the wreck. We hustled it on to the raft in a pile, and I told Jim to float along down and show a light when he judged he had gone about a mile, and keep it burning till I come. Then I manned my oars and shoved for the light. As I got down towards it, 3 or 4 more showed, up on a hillside. It was a village. I closed in above the shore light and laid on my oars and floated. As I went by, I see it was a lantern hanging on the jackstaff of a double-hull ferry boat. I skimmed around for the watchman, a-wondering whereabouts he slept, and by I found him roosting on the bitts for'ard, with his head down between his knees. I gave his shoulder 2 or 3 little shoves and begun to cry. He stirred up in a kind of startlish way, but when he see it was only me, he took a good gap and stretch, and then he said, "Hello, what's up? Don't cry, bub. What's the trouble?" I says, "Pap and Mam and Sis and—" Then I broke down. He says, "Aw, dang it now, don't take on so. We all has to have our troubles, and this'll come out all right. What's the matter with them?" Are you the watchman of the boat?" "Yes," he says, kind of pretty well satisfied like. "I'm the captain and the owner and the mate and the pilot and watchman and head deckhand, and sometime I'm the freight and passengers. I ain't as rich as old Jim Hornback, and I can't be so blamed generous and good to Tom, Dick, and Harry as what he is, and slam around money the way he does. But I told him many a time I wouldn't trade places with him, for, says I A sailor's life's the life for me, and I'm derned if I'd live 2 mile out of town, where there ain't nothing ever going on, not for all his spondulicks, and as much more on top of it,' says I. I broke in and says, 'They're in an awful peck of trouble, and' "'Who is?' "'Why, Mam and Pap and Sis and Miss Hooker, and if you'd take your ferry boat and go up there.' "'Up where? Where are they?' "'On the wreck.' "'What wreck?' "'Why, there ain't but one.' "'What, you don't mean the Walter Scott?' "'Yes.' "'Good land! What are they doing there, for gracious sakes?' "'Well, they didn't go there a purpose.' "'I bet they didn't. Why, great goodness, there ain't no chance for 'em if they don't get off mighty quick. Why, how in the nation did they ever get into such a scrape?' "'Easy enough. Miss Hooker was a visiting up there to the town.' "'Yes, Booth's Landing. Go on.' "'She was a visiting there, at Booth's Landing, and just in the edge of the evening she started over with her nigger woman in the horse ferry to stay all night at her friend's house, Miss What you may call her, I disremember her name, and they lost their steering oar and swung around and went a floating down, stern first, about 2 miles, and saddle bagsed on the wreck, and the ferryman and the nigger woman and the horses was all lost. But Miss Hooker she made a grab and got aboard the wreck. Well, about an hour after dark we came along down in our trading scow, and it was dark. We didn't notice the wreck till we was right on it, and so we saddle bagsed. But all of us was saved but Bill Whipple, and oh, he was the best creetur. I most wished it had been me, I do. By George, it's the beatin'est thing I ever struck. And then what did you all do?' "'Well, we hollered and took on, but it's so wide there we couldn't make nobody hear. So Pap said somebody got to get ashore and get help somehow. I's the only one that could swim. So I made a dash for it, and Miss Hooker she said if I didn't strike help sooner, come here and hunt up her uncle and he'd fix the thing. I made the land about a mile below, and been fooling along ever since, trying to get people to do something, but they said, "What, in such a night, in such a current? There ain't no sense in it. Go for the steam ferry. Now, if you'll go in, by Jackson, I'd like to, and blame it, I don't know but I will. But who in the dignation's a going to pay for it? Do you reckon your Pap? Why, that's all right. Miss Hooker, she told me particular that her Uncle Hornback. Great guns! Is he her uncle? Looky here. You break for that light over yonder way and turn out west when you get there. And about a quarter of a mile out you'll come to the tavern. Tell him to dart you out to Jim Hornback's and he'll foot the bill. And don't you fool around any, 'cause he'll want to know the news. Tell him I'll have his niece all safe before he can get to town. Hump yourself now. I'm a-going up around the corner here to roust my engineer." I struck for the light, but as soon as he turned the corner I went back and got into my skiff and bailed her out, and then pulled up shore in the easy water about 600 yards and tucked myself in among some wood boats, for I couldn't rest easy till I could see the ferry boat start. But take it all round, I was feeling rather comfortable on accounts of taking all this trouble for that gang, for not many would have done it. I wished the widow knowed it. I judged she'd be proud of me for helping these rapscallions, 'cause rapscallions and deadbeats is the kind the widow and good people take the most interest in. Well, before long here comes the wreck, dim and dusky, sliding along down. A kind of cold shiver went through me, and then I struck out for her. She was very deep, and I see in a minute there weren't much chance for anybody being alive in her. I pulled all around her and hollered a little, but there wasn't any answer. All dead still. I felt a little bit heavy-hearted about the gang, but not much, for I reckoned if they could stand it I could. Then here comes the ferry boat, so I shoved for the middle of the river on a long downstream slant, and when I judged I was out of eye reach, I laid on my oars and looked back, and see her go and smell around the wreck for Miss Hooker's remainders, because the captain would know her Uncle Hornback would want 'em. And then pretty soon the ferry boat give it up and went for shore, and I laid into my work and went a booming down the river. It did seem a powerful long time before Jim's light showed up, and when it did show, it looked like it was 1,000 miles off. By the time I got there, the sky was beginning to get a little gray in the east, so we struck for an island and hid the raft and sunk the skiff and turned in and slept like dead people. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14. By and by, when we got up, we turned over the truck the gang had stole off of the wreck, and found boots and blankets and clothes and all sorts of other things, and a lot of books and a spyglass and 3 boxes of cigars. We had never been this rich before in neither of our lives. The cigars was prime. We laid off all the afternoon in the woods talking, and me reading the books and having a general good time. I told Jim all about what happened inside the wreck and at the ferry boat, and I said these kinds of things is adventures, but he said he didn't want no more adventures. He said that when I went in the Texas and he crawled back to get on the raft and found her gone, he nearly died, 'cause he judged it was all up with him anyway. It could be fixed. For if he didn't get saved, he'd get drowned, and if he did get saved, whoever saved him would send him back home so as to get the reward, and then Miss Watson would sell him south, sure. Well, he was right. He was most always right. He had an uncommon level head for a Negro. I read considerable to Jim about kings and dukes and earls and such, and how gaudy they dressed, and how much style they put on, and called each other your majesty and your grace and your lordship, and so on, instead of mister. And Jim's eyes bugged out, and he was interested. He says, "I didn't know dey was so many on 'em. I hain't heard 'bout none of 'em scarcely but old King Solomon, unless you counts dem kings that's in a pack of kyards. How much do a king get?" "Get?" I says. "Why, they get $1,000 a month if they want it. They can have just as much as they want. Everything belongs to them. Ain't dat gay? And what dey got to do, Huck? They don't do nothing. Why, how you talk! They just set around." "No. Is that so?" "Course it is. They just set around, except maybe when there's a war. Then they go to the war. But other times they just lazy around, or go hawking, just hawking and Shh! Do you hear a noise?" We skipped out and looked, but it warn't nothing but the flutter of a steamboat's wheel away down, coming round the point. So we come back. "Yes," says I, "and other times when things is dull they fuss with their parliament, and if everybody don't go just so he whacks their heads off. But mostly they hang round the harem." "Round the which?" "Harem." "What's the harem?" "The place where he keeps his wives. Don't you know about a harem? Solomon had one. He had about 1,000,000 wives." "Why, yes, that's so. I done forget it. A harem's a boarding house, I reckon. Most likely dey has rackety times in the nursery, and I reckon the wives quarrels considerable, and dat crease the racket. Yet dey say Solomon de wisest man dat ever lived. I don't take no stock in dat, because why would a man want to live in the midst of such a blim-blamming all the time? No, 'deed he wouldn't. A wise man 'd take and build a biler factory, and den he could shut down the biler factory when he want to rest. Well, but he was the wisest man anyway, 'cause the widow she told me so her own self. I don't care what the widow say, he wa'n't no wise man nuther. He had some of the dad fetchedest ways I ever seen. Does you know 'bout that child that he was gwine to chop in two? Yes, the widow told me all about that. Well, den, wa'n't dat the beatin'est notion in the world? You just take and look at it a minute. Dat's the stump dar. Dat's one of the women. Here's you. Dat's the other one. I's Solomon, and dish yere dollar bill's the child. Before'n you claims it, what does I do? Does I shin around 'mongst the neighbors and find out which on you the bill do belong to, and hand it over to the right one, all safe and sound, the way anybody that had any gumption would? No, I take and whack the bill in two, and give half on it to you and the yother half to the yother woman. That's the way Solomon was gwine to do with the child. Now I want to ask you, what's the use of that half a bill? Can't buy nothing with it. And what use is a half a child? I wouldn't give a darn for 1,000,000 of 'em. But hang it, Jim, you've clean missed the point. Blame it, you missed it 1,000 mile. Who? Me? Go long. Don't talk to me 'bout your pints. I reckon I know sense, and I see it. And they ain't no sense in sich doin's as dat. The 'spute wasn't about a half a child. The 'spute was about a whole child. And the man that think he can settle a 'spute 'bout a whole child with a half a child don't know enough to come in out of rain. Don't talk to me about Solomon, Huck. I knows him by the back. But I tell you don't get the point. Blame the point. I reckon I knows what I knows. And mind you, the real point is further. It's down deeper. It lays in the way Solomon was raised. You take a man that got only 1 or 2 children, is dat man gwine to be wasteful of children? No, he ain't. He can't afford it. He knows how to value 'em. But you take a man that's got 'bout 5,000,000 children running round the house, and it's different. He as soon chop a child in two as a cat. Dey's plenty more. A child or two, more or less, warn't no consequence to Solomon, dad fetch him. I never see such a negro. If he got a notion in his head once, there weren't no getting it out again. He was the most down on Solomon of any negro I ever seen. So I went to talking about other kings and let Solomon slide. I told about Louis XVI that got his head cut off in France long time ago, and about his little boy, the Dolphin. That would be a king, but they took and shut him up in jail, and some say he died there. Poor little chap. But some says he got out and got away and come to America. That's good, but he'll be pooty lonesome. There ain't no kings here, is they, Huck? No, then he can't get no situation. What he gwine do? Well, I don't know. Some of them gets on the police, and some of them learns people how to talk French. Why, Huck, don't the French people talk the same way we does? No, Jim, you couldn't understand a word they said. Not a single word. Well, now I be ding busted. How did that come? I don't know, but it's so. I got some of their jabber out of a book. S'pose a man was to come to you and say, "Parlez-vous Français?" What would you think? I wouldn't think nothing. I'd take and bust him over the head. That is, if he weren't white. I wouldn't allow no negro to call me that. Shucks, it ain't calling you anything. It's only saying, do you know how to talk French? Well, then, why couldn't he say it? Why, he is a saying it. That's a Frenchman's way of saying it. Well, it's a blame ridiculous way, and I don't want to hear no more about it. There ain't no sense in it. Looky here, Jim. Does a cat talk like we do? No, a cat don't. Well, does a cow? No, cow don't nuther. Does a cat talk like a cow, or a cow talk like a cat? No, they don't. It's natural and right for 'em to talk different from each other, ain't it? Course. And ain't it natural and right for a cat and a cow to talk different from us? Why, most surely it is. Well then, why ain't it natural and right for a Frenchman to talk different from us? You answer me that. Is a cat a man, Huck? No. Well, then there ain't no sense in a cat talking like a man. Is a cow a man? Is a cow a cat? No, she ain't either of them. Well then, she ain't got no business to talk like either one or the other of them. Is a Frenchman a man? Yes. Well then, dad blame it, why don't he talk like a man? You answer me that. I see it weren't no use wasting words. You can't learn a Negro to argue. So I quit. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15. We judged that 3 nights more'd fetch us to Cairo at the bottom of Illinois, where the Ohio River comes in, and that was what we was after. We'd sell the raft and get on a steamboat and go way up the Ohio amongst the free states, and then be out of trouble. Well, the second night a fog begun to come on, and we made for a towhead to tie to, for it wouldn't do to try to run in a fog. But when I paddled ahead in the canoe with the line to make fast, there weren't anything but little saplings to tie to. I passed the line round one of 'em, right on the edge of the cut bank, but there was a stiff current, and the raft came booming down so lively she tore it out by the roots, and away she went. I see the fog closing down, and it made me so sick and scared I couldn't budge for most of half a minute, it seemed to me. And then there weren't no raft in sight. You couldn't see 20 yards. I jumped into the canoe and run back to the stern and grabbed the paddle and set her back a stroke, but she didn't come. I was in such a hurry I hadn't untied her. I got up and tried to untie her, but I was so excited my hands shook, so I couldn't hardly do anything with her. As soon as I got started, I took out after the raft, hot and heavy, right down the towhead. That was all right as far as it went, but the towhead warn't 60 yards long, and the minute I flew by the foot of it, I shot out into the solid white fog and had no more idea which way I was going than a dead man. Thinks I, it won't do to paddle. First, I know I'll run into the bank or a towhead or something. I gotta set still and float, and yet it's mighty fidgety business to have to hold your hands still at such a time. I whooped and listened. Away down there somewheres I hears a small whoop, and up comes my spirits. I went tearing after it, listening sharp to hear it again. Next time it come I see I warn't heading for it, but heading away to the right of it. And the next time I was heading away to the left of it, and not gaining on it much either, for I was flying around this way and that and the other, but it was going straight ahead all the time. I did wish the fool would think to beat a tin pan and beat it all the time, but he never did, and it was the still places between the whoops that was making the trouble for me. Well, I fought along, and directly I hears the whoop behind me. I was tangled good now. That was somebody else's whoop, or else I was turned around. I throwed the paddle down. I heard the whoop again. It was behind me yet, but in a different place. It kept coming and kept changing its place, and I kept answering, till by and by it was in front of me again. And I knowed the current had swung the canoe's head downstream, and I was all right if that was Jim and not some other raftsman hollering. I couldn't tell nothing about voices in a fog, for nothing don't look natural nor sound natural in a fog. The whooping went on, and in about a minute I come a booming down on a cut bank with smoky ghosts of big trees on it, and the current throwed me off to the left and shot by amongst a lot of snags that fairly roared. The current was tearing by them so swift. In another second or two it was solid white and still again. I set perfectly still then, listening to my heart thump, and I reckon I didn't draw a breath while it thumped 100. I just give up then. I knowed what the matter was. That cut bank was an island, and Jim had gone down the other side of it. It warn't no towhead that you could float by in 10 minutes. It had the big timber of a regular island, must be 5 or 6 miles and more than half a mile wide. I kept quiet with my ears cocked about 15 minutes, I reckon. I was floating along, of course, 4 or 5 miles an hour, but you don't ever think of that. No, you feel like you're laying dead still on the water, and if a little glimpse of a snag slips by, you don't think to yourself how fast you're going, but you catch your breath and think, my, how that snag's tearing along. If you think it ain't dismal and lonesome out in a fog that way by yourself in the night, you try it once. You'll see. Next, for about a half an hour, I whoops now and then. At last I hears the answer a long ways off and tries to follow it, but I couldn't do it. And directly I judged I'd got into a nest of towheads, for I had little dim glimpses of 'em on both sides of me. Sometimes just a narrow channel between, and some that I couldn't see I knowed was there because I'd hear the wash of the current against the old dead brush and trash that hung over the banks. Well, I warn't long loosing the hoops down amongst the towheads, and I only tried to chase them a little while anyway, 'cause it was worse than chasing a jack-o'-lantern. You never knowed a sound dodge round so, and swap places so quick and so much. I had to claw away from the bank pretty lively 4 or 5 times to keep from knocking the islands out of the river, and so I judged the raft must be butting into the bank every now and then, or else it would get further ahead and clear out of hearing. It was floating a little faster than I was. Well, I seemed to be in the open river again by and by, but I couldn't hear no sign of a whoop nowheres. I reckon Jim had fetched up on a snag maybe, and it was all up with him. I was good and tired, so I laid down the canoe and said I wouldn't bother no more. I didn't want to go to sleep, of course, but I was so sleepy I couldn't help it. So I thought I'd take just one little catnap. But I reckon it was more than a catnap, for when I waked up the stars was shining bright, the fog was all gone, and I was spinning down a big bend stern first. First I didn't know where I was. I thought I was dreaming, and when things began to come back to me, they seemed to come up dim out of last week. It was a monstrous big river here, with the tallest and the thickest kind of timber on both banks, just a solid wall, as well as I could see by the stars. I looked away downstream and seen a black speck on the water. I took after it, but when I got to it, it warn't nothing but a couple of saw logs made fast together. Then I see another speck and chased that, then another, and this time I was right. It was the raft. When I got to it, Jim was sitting there with his head down between his knees asleep, with his right arm hanging over the steering oar. The other oar was smashed off, and the raft was littered up with leaves and branches and dirt, so she'd had a rough time. I made fast and laid down under Jim's nose in the raft, and began to gap and stretch my fists out against Jim and says, "Hello, Jim. Have I been asleep? Why didn't you stir me up? Goodness gracious, is that you, Huck? And you ain't dead? You ain't drownded? You's back again. It's too good for true, honey. It's too good for true. Let me look at you, child. Let me feel you. You ain't dead. You's back again. Living sound, just the same old Huck. The same old Huck. Thanks to goodness. What's the matter with you, Jim? You been a drinking? Drinking? Has I been a drinking? Has I had a chance to be a drinking? Well, then, what makes you so wild? How? Does I talk wild? How? Why, hain't you been talking about my coming back and all that stuff, as if I'd been gone away? Huck Finn, You look me in de eye. Look me in de eye. Hain't you been gone away? Gone away? Why, what in the nation do you mean? I hain't been gone anywheres. Where would I go to? Well, look a here, boss. There's something wrong, there is. Is I me, or who is I? Is I here, or what is I? Now, that's what I want to know. Well, I think you're here, plain enough, but I think you're a tangle-headed old fool, Jim. I is I? Well, you answer me this. Didn't you tote out the line in the canoe for to make fast to the towhead? No, I didn't. What towhead? I ain't seen no towhead. You ain't seen no towhead? Looky here. Didn't the line pull loose and the raft go a humming down the river and leave you in the canoe behind in the fog? What fog? Why, the fog that's been around all night. And didn't you whoop, and didn't I whoop, till we got mixed up in the islands and one of us got lost and the other one was just as good as lost, 'cause he didn't know where he was? And didn't I bust up agin a lot of them islands and have a turrible time and most get drownded? Now ain't that so, boss? Ain't it so? You answer me that. Well, this is too many for me, Jim. I ain't seen no fog, nor no islands, nor no troubles, nor nothing. I've been sitting here talking with you all night till you went to sleep about 10 minutes ago, and I reckon I done the same. You couldn't have got drunk in that time, so of course you've been dreaming. Dad fetch it. How's I going to dream all that in 10 minutes? Well, hang it, you did dream it, 'cause there didn't any of it happen. But, Huck, it's all just as plain to me as it don't make no difference how plain it is. There ain't nothing in it. I know, because I've been here all the time. Jim didn't say nothing for about 5 minutes, but sat there studying over it. Then he says, "Well, then, I reckon I did dream it, Huck. But dog my cats if it ain't the powerfulest dream I ever see, and hain't been ever had no dream before that's tired me out like this one. Oh, well, that's all right, because a dream does tire a body like everything sometimes. But this one was a staving dream. Tell me all about it, Jim." So Jim went to work and told me the whole thing right through, just as it happened, only he painted it up considerable. Then he said he must start in and interpret it, because it was sent him for a warning. He said the first towhead stood for a man that would try to do us some good, but the current was another man that would get us away from him. The whoops were warnings that would come to us every now and then, and if we didn't try hard to make out to understand 'em, they'd just take us into bad luck, 'stead of keeping us out of it. The lot of towheads was troubles we was going to get into with quarrelsome people and all kinds of mean folks. But if we minded our business and didn't talk back and aggravate 'em, we would pull through and get out of the fog and into the big clear river, which was the free states, and wouldn't have no more trouble. It had clouded up pretty dark just after I got on to the raft, but it was clearing up again now. "Oh, well, that's all interpreted well enough as far as it goes, Jim," I says, "but what does these things stand for?" It was the leaves and rubbish on the raft and the smashed oar. You could see 'em first rate now. Jim looked at the trash, and then looked at me, and back at the trash again. He had got the dream fixed so strong in his head that he couldn't seem to shake it loose and get the facts back into place again right away. But when he did get the thing straightened out, he looked at me steady without ever smiling, and says, "What do they stand for? I's gwine to tell you. When I got all wore out with work and with the calling for you, and went to sleep, my heart was most broke because you was lost, and I didn't care no more what became of me and the raft. And when I wake up and find you back again all safe and sound, the tears come, and I could 'a' got down on my knees and kissed your foot, I's so thankful. And all you was thinking about was how you could make a fool of old Jim with a lie. Dat truck dar is trash, and trash is what people is that puts dirt in de head of their friends and make 'em ashamed." Then he got up slow and walked to the wigwam, and went in there without saying anything but that. But that was enough. It made me feel so mean I could almost kissed his foot to get him to take it back. It was 15 minutes before I could work myself up to go and humble myself to a negro, but I done it, and I warn't ever sorry for it afterwards neither. I didn't do him no more mean tricks, and I wouldn't done that one if I'd 'a knowed it would make him feel that way. End of chapter 15.